Well, hello there, everybody. Feels like we've been doing quite a lot of this lately, but as you might have noticed, this episode is coming out a day later than we normally release them. Usually they're a Wednesday thing. And the reason being is that, once again, Nintendo has decided to drop a little bit of an info dump on Tears of the Kingdom for us. So basically, Nintendo announced that they were going to be dropping what was ostensibly the final trailer for Tears of the Kingdom on Thursday, the day after we were supposed to originally air this episode. And because of that, Matt and I decided to push out so that we could attach some thoughts to the end of this one. Just cover it and strike while the iron is hot. So that discussion does come towards the end of this episode. There will be a spoiler warning. So if you are spoiler averse on Tears of the Kingdom, not to worry. We give ample warning, and there will be time to bounce out of here before we really get into that. So again, look for that whole discussion after the Sacred Realms rundown in this episode. But until then, on with the show. Welcome to Sacred Realms. It's a great day in Hyrule, y'all. Welcome to Sacred Realms, a Zelda Retrospective Podcast. I'm your host, Lyndon Willoughby, joined as always by my co-host, Matt Willoughby, deep into our playthrough of A Link Between Worlds. We are squarely in the back third of the game at this point, Matt. We're kind of in that home stretch period now, you know, where I can see the end of the game on the horizon. And it's always a weird feeling because, especially games like A Link Between Worlds, where we come up with the episode list at the front of the season, and it's just like 14 episodes or whatever, because these top downs typically have got a lot of dungeons and whatnot. It feels like, oh, we got a big old season coming up, Yep. And then it just slowly whittles itself away.
Until we get down to this part where we are kind of coming towards the home stretch, right? Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. No, that's fair.
But
here we are in the starting the home stretch journey towards completion, which feels good. It always feels good to start that. It's like, I know you never ran track because nobody should ever run track. It's a horrible sport. It's really awful. But you start that back 100-yard dash when you're running the 400 meter, and you get to you round that second you round that corner and you start the back 100 and you see the end in sight.
You sound like that admiral from Best of Both Worlds who's like, Picard gets assimilated and he's all like,
I saw a freshman overtake three seniors on the final
hill. He would
hill.
never work for the Borg, and you know why? Because I saw him win this crazy marathon one time or something. And I'm like, cool? I don't know. I don't see how that's relevant, dude. Like... But your analogy was much better than that.
I was about to say, I feel like mine actually worked, whereas his did not in any way, shape, or form. But okay,
there you go. You got a one up on Admiral Hansen. So
Badmiral Hansen.
Badmiral Hansen. Yeah, there you go.
He's the worst.
There you go.
The fight does not go well, Enterprise.
The fight does not go well, Enterprise. How are you doing tonight, Matt?
I'm good, Lyndon. I am excellent. It's a beautiful spring evening. Currently, minimal bug assault happening, so as long as that maintains the status quo, then we'll keep cruising in Excellentville. But yeah, it's good. I had a good day with playing some game, and I told you a little bit right before we started that did something a little bit different today. Just tried to shake it up a bit. So excited to talk about that some. But outside of that, I'm also excellent because we have a guest on again, and one of our favorites, a returning favorite. I think first time this season, though.
Yep.
First time this season. First time in a while. Max Nichols, good to have you back on, my friend. How are you doing this evening?
Oh, I'm doing great. Finally glad to finally end my long break from Sacred Realms. It's a quirk of the dungeons I picked, I guess.
Yeah, we are equally glad that hiatus has finally ended.
Yeah, I think this is definitely probably the longest gap that we've ever had between appearances on the show for you, excepting your first ever appearance on the show, and that's because the first time we ever had you on was the Water Temple. So that that was pretty deep into Ocarina of Time. But yeah, definitely been much longer than it usually is. A few factors in play there. One is that like you said, we've just got a lot of dungeons in this game, and we've had Jackson back for multiples. So that's not something I ever thought we'd be able to say again. But hey, here we are. We made it happen. So yay! But regardless, this is one that I'm actually really glad that we have you back for, and you requested it specially. So I think it's going to be a great conversation. But since we haven't really caught up with you since Triforce Quest on Wind Waker, I mean, how have you been doing, man? Are you just as excited for May the 12th as we are? It's getting real close.
I am very excited. I have the day off. I actually have like a week and a half off a little bit later that month, but that's because it's like my anniversary and stuff. It's just a bonus that it happens to be when Tears of the Kingdom is too.
Dude. I'm having a revelation as you're talking.
Uh-oh.
I just realized I get to meet you in person this year.
Oh yeah? Are you coming to the Bungie Day grand opening?
I'm flying up for the Bungie Day HQ grand opening party.
Nice. Yeah, for listeners who don't know the context, we've been working from home for millions of years, and we're going to continue to allow employees of Bungie to work from home, but they are opening the office after a big renovation for optional work, and they also do a yearly Bungie Day. We do a yearly Bungie Day celebration. Bungie Day is 7/7, so they're combining those two and flying all the
all the remote FT full-time employees. Yeah. Digital first. I love it. It's a fantastic way to be, but I would be lying if I said that I'm not wildly excited to make it up there. And to, actually get to chat with you in person. We may actually have to do this in reverse. we may have to plan it so that we're doing an episode that week, but it's you and I recording in person, Max,
and me
and Matt has to dial in.
Yeah, that would be hilarious.
We'll talk about it.
Now I really want to do that just for the.
I know, right?
That would be fun.
We'll workshop it, but yeah, I think that'd be a wasted opportunity to not do that. Regardless, I just totally derailed your whole thing. We were trying to talk about Tears of the Kingdom.
Oh no, that's fine. It wasn't that. I basically just saying I have time off that I'm going to use some of on Tears of the Kingdom, and I'm very excited. I've so far managed to avoid spoilers for the most part. I haven't seen anything that was revealed in the last couple videos they released that I know of. There's some stuff where I've seen it. I'm like, I don't know if this is fan art of something or something from a trailer, and I don't want to know. So maybe a little, but
good on you. I think I know that it was very important to you to not be spoiled in any major way going into this, and so I'm glad to hear that has been successful. I feel like there's a few things probably really working in your favor here, and one of those is the fact that Nintendo can hardly be said to be drowning us in information about this thing. So
yeah, I've never been happier for Nintendo's secrecy.
Right? Oh man, I for one, obviously no spoilers, but I've been keeping up with all the official stuff, and am very excited by what I've been seeing. So that's a good feeling. It's good to feel like you're cruising towards.
I'm glad you're not coming on being like, oh man, Max, you're in for a disappointment. Man.
Honestly, this game just doesn't look that great.
Obviously, we're still firming up plans around Tears of the Kingdom, and I think we've said we're going to do 4 episodes, but we're going to be trying to figure out who's going to be on and doing what. And because I was actually talking to Matt about that the other day, and I think even though it's going to be really fun having a few episodes of just a more freewheeling conversational tone, because we don't want to be doing a review season for this thing right when it comes out, but it's going to be very difficult knowing how to structure those between people who are at different
points in the game.
Different points in the game. Some people are going to be playing faster or slower, and then you get into all of the conversations around who's even to say that this game is one that's going to be played in any kind of standard order, because it's completely possible that it won't be,
Time does not flow straight when you play Tears of the Kingdom.
That is true. Yeah.
Yeah. If you have me on, it will probably only be for that 4th one, because it's probably going to take me a month to play through, and I'm not going to want to play until I finish, or not going to want to podcast until I finish.
I feel like
so we'll see.
I feel like the easiest one is definitely going to be like if Tears of the Kingdom does have any kind of Great Plateau analog of any kind.
Then that first episode's going to be easy.
Sure, because then we can just be like, play to this point, and then we'll just talk about like first impressions, you know?
Yeah.
And that would be pretty nice, but I don't know. We'll see. Lots of
first impressions episode is a good gimme.
Yeah. Lots of unanswered questions that will very shortly become answered. So good times there. And just a reminder to everybody, that's May 12th. So if you are all about getting that in a physical format, then now's the time to do your pre-orders. And if you're like me and you're tired of keeping up with tiny little game microchips, then just get that digital and your life will be way easier.
And at least for other games, I've seen Nintendo do pre-downloads that then are just available as soon as it goes live at midnight, whatever. So you might be able to do that. So just keep an eye out for any pre-downloads that you can do. So if you're one of those people that just can't wait, May 12th at 12:01 a.m. Local time, you'll probably be able to just hop right in.
Yeah. And if you're lucky, it'll glitch and it'll let you play right away.
Ooh, that would be...
That happened to one person who downloaded the pre-download or something for the Advance Wars remake, and then they delayed it several months, like 6 months. One person just like had the whole game
and just played it all the way through
ages before it came out.
It's awesome.
Uh-huh. And this person never lost access, like he never got booted out or anything.
I'm not sure if they eventually lost the access or not. Kotaku had an article about it a week
I would imagine
ago.
if that person was thinking ahead, I'm sure they probably just left the game running on their Switch and
never closed it out.
Didn't turn the Switch off.
Yep.
Because hey, it can't push you for an update if you never close the game. So so there you go. That's using your brain. All right. Well, cool. Yeah, may that happen to some lucky person, or maybe even all of us. Who's to say? So since this is the first episode that we've had you on for this game, Max, let's go ahead and do the thing we always do, where we catch up with you about your history with A Link Between Worlds, talk about, kind of your recollection of this game, kind of where you hold it in terms of rankings in the canon of Zelda games. I think that this is not actually one that we've had a lot of crosstalk with you about over the course of doing the podcast. I know it's come up with a few other people once or twice, but I don't recall ever having a conversation with you about this game specifically.
Yeah, I don't think I've chatted about it here. So I have told this story a little bit before, so I'll rush through it. But basically, when Link Between Worlds came out, that was like 2013. And I was in I think that was 2013 at least, something like that. And I was in I was at my lowest point as a Zelda fan. I had essentially had multiple, like 3 or 4 Zelda games in a row that each one disappointed me more than the last over a period of like 10 years.
Culminating in the worst Zelda game of all time, The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword.
Something like that, yes.
Are you okay, Matt? Are you good? I don't even believe that. I just did it for the reaction.
Just glaring at you.
Don't want to hurt Matt.
I'm just glaring at Lyndon. It's not even your fault anymore, Max. I'm just glaring at him.
Matthew used glare. It was super effective.
So I didn't even know if I really was planned on buying A Link Between Worlds. That's how low I was. I was like, I don't know if I'm going to buy it. I don't know. And I eventually did cave and pre-order the special edition 3DS for it. But that's because I wanted the 3DS more than because of Link
That
Between
3DS
Worlds.
was really cool.
So I didn't play it until like a week after it came out, and then I loved it. It felt like.
Did it feel like coming
I was
home?
Playing a real Zelda game for the first time in a decade. I'm saying some inflammatory things right now, but that's how it felt to me at the time.
It makes for good pod.
Yep, and I devoured it. I think I played it in like a couple settings. Basically, it's not that long of a game, but still, that was a lot. And then I immediately, and this is maybe the only game I've ever done this with, other than like Undertale, where I beat it and then I immediately played it through again, on hero mode, whatever they called it in this one, which is the one and only time I've ever played a Zelda game on hero mode. And And yeah, it basically revitalized my interest in the series.
So I know that you obviously have got a lot of love for A Link to the Past. Was the promise of a sequel to that game, which kind of reuses its overworld and is very much like a spiritual successor to such a classic, was that kind of a big draw for you in terms of things that convinced you to actually pull the trigger on it?
Trying to think back. I don't think so. I was actually pretty pessimistic about that. Like, I thought it was lame. I'll be honest. I was like, this seems really dumb that they're just reusing the same overworld. The whole point of Zelda is to explore an overworld. I've already explored this one a million times. Was sort of my thought process at the time. So that wasn't a draw, but it was probably a thing that helped it feel like coming home, to use Matt's phrase there, for me, right? Like, if I'd been missing, what felt like a real Zelda experience or whatever, however I framed it at the time, then it being my favorite 2D Zelda, or favorite 2D Hyrule, rather, certainly didn't hurt.
You got your fill of member berries on that one. Well, that's cool. It is interesting because I've wondered to myself, like, if that had been the marketing push for a game that I had that amount of nostalgia for, because when this game was coming out, I was following it and I knew I was going to get it day one. I was very excited for it, but I had no nostalgia for A Link to the Past because I hadn't played it yet. So I've wondered, like, hypothetical exercise, if Nintendo was ever to do this kind of thing with, like, Ocarina of Time, for instance, like, not just a remake, but like same game or new game in a same space. Would I have difficulty dismissing it as anything other than like just a cash in, like a cash grab on people's nostalgia, especially these days where that's kind of like the modus operandi for a lot of big IP that are floating around out there.
All right, there's our big word for the episode. We're sticking to that one.
Modus operandi.
Yep,
cool.
That's our word for the episode.
We have to say it 12 more times.
But yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the answer to that is, but definitely an interesting thought exercise. But anyway, so clearly you love the game, played it twice in a row. How has it kind of like maintained its status in your memory as you get further and further from it?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I was actually surprised by the answer to this question because I replayed it for this podcast a couple months ago.
Oh, thank you. Maximum Nichols, who famously does not replay games.
Doing his homework.
And it was the first time I'd replayed it since it came out. And I still enjoyed it thoroughly, but I actually was surprised that it didn't blow me away anymore like it did the first time. Like I think it's great, but it is not one of my top Zelda games. Even though it played that special role in reigniting my love of the series, like I don't hold it in that high of regard in the canon of Zelda.
Yeah. Well, you've also had, we've all had the Link's Awakening remaster since that time too. So, which at least for me, and if I remember correctly for you as well, really served to, be an excellent experience that like reminded us all the reasons that we loved that game so much in the first place, and just kind of like showcased all the excellent things about it with a brand new coat of paint. In my mind, the Link's Awakening remake does an incredible job of actually recapturing the same feelings that the original game made me feel. Like it's the same notes. Link Between Worlds, I think, has very different strengths than A Link to the Past did. Like it's good, but it's good for very different reasons, and I think lesser reasons.
Well,
I don't think it's half the game A Link to the Past is.
Wow. Well, I mean... Oh, wait. I'm sorry. I think I misheard you. Were you saying that you don't think A Link Between Worlds is half the game, or A Link's Awakening is half the game?
I don't think Link Between
Okay,
it's half the game.
I thought you said that about Link's Awakening, and I was like, I'm very confused because I thought that was your favorite Zelda game.
Ways,
so now I'm confused.
In some ways, I think you could say that A Link Between Worlds is exactly half the game that A Link to the Past is.
Okay, I'm sorry. I was confused. No longer confused. Push forward.
Oh, that's totally fair. Which I'll probably get into a little bit more as we talk more. I want to chat for a while about like the world design of Link Between Worlds.
Definitely.
I think that'll be an interesting topic. But yeah. Something I do want to throw out there because it's come up in a couple of the episodes so far this season. A Link Between Worlds did not start off as a remake of A Link to the Past.
Really?
It was originally just a new handheld Zelda game. They prototyped the In the Wall mechanic with cell shaded like Toon Link originally. Like it was going to be like it was being tested with the same art style
Minish
as
Cap.
like Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks. So the Link to the Past world came in later. I can get more into that later. I might leave that topic for the second episode I'm going to be in next week.
You can't get it all out of the way all in one go. You know,
yeah, there's too much.
Yeah,
you don't want a 3-hour episode here.
Well, we might get one anyway. Who knows? But yeah, they tend to happen. But I would actually say, I mean, if you do have anything you want to say about the overworld and kind of the general construction of this game and thoughts and feelings about it, then unless you feel like it dovetails really well with discussions about Desert Palace, then I would say you could probably go ahead and do that here just as context going into our more specific discussion.
Okay, so I'm going to start with a question to you two. Which do you think has a world that feels larger to you as the player? Link to the Past or Link Between Worlds?
Link to the Past, I think, feels larger because fast travel comes in later and isn't as prevalent or as used as it is in A Link Between Worlds, which I think we talked a little bit about last week about just how much fast travel has shrunk the world to us. And like we're spending less time exploring, less time engaging with the overworld in general. At least that's my opinion. Lyndon, I don't know if you still feel that way or not.
So my answer is the same for slightly different reasons. A Link to the Past feels bigger to me. A few different things kind of all come into that. One is just an interesting quirk of having of the change in art styles, right? Everything that's on the screen in a given time in A Link to the Past, like it feels like you're seeing more stuff, even though you aren't necessarily. There's something about A Link Between Worlds that feels a little bit more zoomed in. And I think that's just down to the extra like depth, you know. There's something about it that feels not necessarily more claustrophobic, but just more zoomed in than A Link to the Past. And the fast travel is definitely a thing as well. Matt's definitely right about that. But, you know, the other part of it for me is just down to familiarity. Like, for some reason, I would actually say that I've played A Link to the Past and Link Between Worlds the same number of times now. And for whatever reason, I don't have as clear of a recall on A Link to the Past, especially once you get into the dark world, like just the geography of it and how to get from one place to another and kind of where everything is. Like I don't have it committed to memory the same way that I do, and that can definitely make a Zelda overworld feel bigger as well, just because there's a certain exploratory quality that comes into play when you don't have a perfect recall of something, you know.
Right. So I agree with you both. I think A Link to the Past feels like a bigger, broader world to explore than A Link Between Worlds does. And I think there's a bunch of reasons. I think the fast travel is a good call out because fast travel does shrink worlds. Because it literally just means you have to spend less time in them. And you see them less. And there's also literally details like you are more zoomed in. I think you are actually more zoomed in A Link Between Worlds than in A Link to the Past. It's a little bit hard to do apples to apples comparison there because they have different aspect ratios. A Link to the Past is 4:3 and Link Between Worlds is widescreen. I actually think 4x3 is better for top-down games personally, because it gives you more equal view north and south to east and west. But I digress there, I guess. So I think that's a big thing. And there's also stuff like could have sworn that A Link Between Worlds, you physically walked slower than you do in other way around. That A Link to the Past, you physically walk slower than you do in A Link Between Worlds. But I looked at some videos beforehand for this podcast, and they seemed to actually be pretty close to identical. So that was just like an illusion of the fact that it was zoomed in more that makes you feel like you're walking faster.
Yeah, and I think that the fluidity of movement in A Link Between Worlds probably contributes to that feeling a little bit as well. Like, of course, we stepped into a little bit of semantic controversy earlier in the season when we said that you can't walk diagonally in A Link to the Past, which isn't true. But to clarify what we meant, we're just saying that like Link is able in A Link Between Worlds, like you can face Link any direction in a 360-degree circle, right? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Link to the Past had 4 facing directions. Link Between Worlds. Does it have 8 or does it have like fine granularity?
It has pretty fine granularity. Yeah.
But you can like get yourself at like a 73-degree angle in the Link Between Worlds. It's not constrained. So it has way more fluid movement in that way.
Yeah.
I was the one for the listeners. I had jumped on the Discord and I was like, why does everyone keep saying you can't go diagonally in A Link to the Past? Of course you could go diagonally. They were all talking about facing.
Yeah, we were slightly inaccurately discussing something that is a difference between the games, but I don't think we were putting quite the right name to it. But yeah, that is a more accurate summation of the difference between the two games. But yeah, I definitely agree. Link to the Past feels bigger.
And there's some other stuff too, like how much of an unknown is it when you're exploring the world in one versus the other? I think my perception is that A Link Between Worlds surfaces a lot more information to you and kind of makes it easier to know where things are and where to go. And that's often, a lot of people would consider that better game design. But one thing it does do is make the world feel smaller.
Yeah. Well,
and there's also just simple stuff like, how far away can you effectively fight things? Much further in A Link Between Worlds than in A Link to the Past.
Yeah.
So that also makes your perception of space shrink.
Well, and a lot of this, too, is down to the repeating conversation that we've had centered around the difference in difficulty philosophy of these games from when A Link to the Past was made to when A Link Between Worlds was made. And you come to the inescapable conclusion that these games are, for the most part, now being developed with a much lower barrier to entry on puzzle solving and wayfinding and even combat difficulty. I think that, like, I think I said an episode or two ago that I personally don't feel that that's either a positive or a negative. It just is a thing, and it creates different experiences between the two games. But, especially talking about the whole wayfinding sort of deal, like the difficulty of exploration and the amount to which your hand is not held in any meaningful way in A Link to the Past definitely kind of contributes to this thing that we're talking about right now.
Yeah. There's an interesting thing that happens where the more a game kind of tries to make sure that you can't get lost and tries to make sure that you can always find the answer to the problems in front of you, the more like guardrails and bowling alley bumpers it puts up, the less it feels like you're exploring an authentic world, and the more it feels like you're being taken through a theme park ride.
Yeah, that's fair.
And like, you could have a million debates about where the right trade-off between those two things is, and like, what can you do to have less of a trade-off and try to get both feelings. But I would say that A Link to the Past world feels more like a actual fantasy world that I'm exploring than A Link to the Past.
And it's so interesting,
other way around, you meant?
Right? Yeah. It's so interesting. I hadn't even considered the difference between these two mechanics before this very moment, but thinking about the way in which you interact with the double world system between games, right? In A Link Between Worlds, it's very rigid in terms of like moving from low rule to high rule can be done only in certain specific points of the map, and there are exact points that need to be there in order for you to do what we're talking about, doing puzzle solving in the overworld, right? Doing exploration towards a goal in the overworld. They put the interdimensional gates exactly where they need to be so that you can get to a specific place. Whereas in A Link to the Past, you get basically once you have the ability to shoop back into the light world from the dark world, you can do that absolutely anywhere that you want. And the only restriction on that is if you like pop back in the middle of an object, then it won't let you do it,
Yep. Yeah, and that's exactly the sort of thing I talk about when I'm talking about like guardrails. Like how much rope do they give you to hang yourself with? It's a double-edged sword. And like you can compare this to Breath of the Wild, which was the next new Zelda game after this, right? Which in some ways, Breath of the Wild was directly and intentionally inspired by A Link Between Worlds. Like they were actively experimenting with like, how do we make a Zelda game non-linear when they made A Link Between Worlds, and they looked to that for inspiration when they made Breath of the Wild. But on this kind of difficulty side of things, Breath of the Wild takes the exact opposite approach, where they're like, nope, here's a bunch of simulated systems. You can mess with them in any way you can think to mess with them. Go knock yourself out. And like that's the design philosophy of Breath of the Wild.
So as a very early experiment in non-linearity in Zelda games, do you feel that A Link Between Worlds is a success?
I think so. I think it's very cool when you can explore around in the world and find dungeons, and decide whether to tackle them or not, based on whether you feel like it or not at that moment. When I was playing through this game recently, I stumbled across Turtle Rock early on, and I was like, yeah, I'm getting tired. I'm going to go to bed. I'm not going to start this dungeon. And then I logged in later, and I was like, I feel like exploring this other place. And I went and found a different dungeon and did that one first instead. And that sort of freedom and organic kind of exploratory feeling is something that really shines when there's non-linearity like they have in this game.
Yeah.
And they made it work. Like they figured out how to make it work by evolving past the Metroidvania progression gating system that Zelda had up to this point, which Matt's mentioned a few times. He's talked about the Metroidvania thing. I think Breath of the Wild's method was more successful, but I think this was a success as well.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, it sounds so. We started this discussion with you saying that you think A Link Between Worlds is great and A Link to the Past is great for different reasons, but you feel that A Link Between Worlds is great for less good reasons, right? And it sounds to me like the reasons that you think it's great, and I think the reasons that Matt and I both think it's great as well, is because yes, you've got fun experiments in nonlinearity. You have a good feeling set of systems and mechanics. You have an entertaining moment to moment gameplay. And basically just a good all around Zelda game. But the highs of those things don't surpass just the magnitude of A Link to the Past's world and that experience.
Yeah,
I would say so. I mean, the stuff that Link Between Worlds does do well, like there's a whole lot of it. The key mechanic, of course, of going to the walls is super cool. And it does make you look at a world that you have already previously explored, if you're like me, at least, in a totally different way, right? Like one of the reasons that reusing the same Hyrule works is because they force you to look at it very differently than you looked at it in A Link to the Past. Like you have to evaluate spatial relationships totally differently than you did in LTTP. So like that's awesome. It has great combat. Just the item upgrade system and the facing improvements from other 2D Zelda games, and the number of enemies they throw at you in certain cases, like that all just feels really good and fun to play. Did you ever play Bastion?
I have not, and I'm actually ashamed. I'm actually ashamed to say that Supergiant's catalog of games is one of the big blind spots in my overall like video game personal history.
I don't even know what that is.
Hades.
Oh man, I actually kind of have been wanting to get into Hades. I don't know. Is it on Xbox?
Yeah. It's on Switch.
Oh, well, there you go.
Yep. I recommend the Switch version so you can play it in bed.
Yes, most definitely.
The reason
Supergiant Games has made, I don't know, like 6 games or something like that, maybe 5. And all but one of the games they've made was my game of the year, the respective year it came out. And the one exception was because they released the game in 2017 and it was competing with Breath of the Wild. So,
it's almost unfair to all other games,
for any
right?
game.
Like,
yeah. I think you put Breath of the Wild up against almost any game, and it probably still comes out as Game of the Year. I don't know of any game in the last decade that would have beaten Breath of the Wild for Game of the Year. Personally,
yeah. I mean, I think it's the best game ever made. So I agree. Where was I going with this? Oh yeah. Anyway, so the combat in Link Between Worlds reminds me of how the combat feels in Bastion, which was Supergiant Games' first game. I highly recommend checking it out because it's awesome in a variety of ways.
It's a roguelike, right? I mean, they kind of all are. No?
Nope. Hades is the only roguelike.
I don't know why I had it in my head that that's kind of what they did.
It might just be because Hades made such a big splash.
But what is Bastion? Like, what's its?
So Bastion it's story driven top down game. It's got kind of more self contained levels. Like you pick a level from a map rather than wandering around a world. But it's got like you can equip a shotgun or a hammer or a bow, and all the different weapons feel very different. You can play any level with different weapons, and it's got like this pretty. Well, I was going to start going into its music and its story and stuff, but it's a little.
So here's my question then: when Sacred Realms eventually spins off into the thing we keep saying we're going to do, which is where we go and we play things that could be categorized as Zelda likes, do you feel like Bastion should have a place in that conversation?
Yeah, I think it could fit. It's less of a Zelda-like than a lot of other Zelda-likes, because it doesn't have what we would call a dungeon. It doesn't have dungeons. It doesn't have a puzzle-solving element. It's like Zelda in that it is a top-down game, and it has combat that functions similarly to some of the 2D Zelda
Gotcha.
games.
Cool.
So, yeah, I don't know. It wouldn't be the top of my list of things that are like Zelda.
Tunic, Hyperlight Drifter, all those other things we keep talking about.
Yeah.
Cool. So with all that being said, there's my phrase there. So one of the my MO, my modus operandi.
There it
is. One of the conversations we keep having about this game is specifically about its dungeons and the way that they're laid out and the way that they function, the flow of them. And I think that's a very important conversation for us to have in the context of all of this. But I really think we need to come back to that when we do actually get into this week's dungeon map, because I have thoughts. It's kind of a continuing conversation in that segment, and I definitely want to get to it there. But before we get into housekeeping, last question for you. I guess this is the big one. I mean, if you had to give us a a numbered ranking of where A Link Between Worlds falls for you, whereabouts would it end up?
Unlike people like Joshua from ZU, I don't really keep a ranking around. This would be in the middle of the pack, probably. Maybe slightly below the middle, to be honest. Although that has more to do with the strength of its competition than anything else.
Kind of talking about it in terms of like the way people talk about Pixar movies, right? Where it's like, I mean, Bug's Life is
it's not Cars,
fine, I guess, but it's not Toy Story, but yeah, exactly. Cool. All right. Well, clearly we've got a lot more to get into and talk about here, but let's go ahead and get the housekeeping out of the way and then get more specifically into some of these topics as they relate to the section of game that we played this week. If you didn't know, Sacred Realms is a weekly re-examination of The Legend of Zelda, one little slice at a time. Sacred Realms drops every Wednesday and is available on all major podcast networks. Every week we play a new section of a Zelda game, and then we sit down here to talk and to drop our hot takes. If that sounds fun to you, please head over to Apple Podcasts, hit that subscribe button, be sure to leave us a review. 5-star reviews are greatly appreciated, and they have a chance to get a shout out here on the show. If you want more Sacred Realms in your life, you can head over to patreon.com/Sacred Realms Pod and get access to our Discord channel, listener mail, vote on what game we play next, and so much more. Additionally, one of the benefits that we offer is that Master Sword patrons and above get their names read every week here on the show. Those legendary individuals are Shepherd Street, Matthew, Chris, Daniel, Fallout 907, Kelso, Tiffany the Star, Daxel, Patrice, Stephanie, Darknuck, Brian, George, Mike, Dylan, Lennon, Melanie, Kolku, Aiden, Rowan, Josh, Nick, Dante, Gep, Brittany, Davey, Haru the Mighty, Derek, Albert, Mark, Andy, Cameron, Ben, Daniel, Nick D_TV, Travis, Christian, Jonathan, Hyrule Interviews, aka your guest of the evening, Maximum Nichols, Garrett, and Drew. These are the most legendary of individuals. We would, what would we do this week, Matt?
Fight a giant living plant that shoots sunbeams at us with them?
Sure. We would do that with any one of y'all on any day of the week. Hopefully that wouldn't happen to us on every day of the week, but I would do that with y'all at least once. Oh my gosh. This is a big old man-eating plant for sure.
Little Shop of Horrors meets the Borg, I guess, because it shoots laser beams. So yeah, we'll go with that.
Cool. Sounds right to me. One additional note real quick. We said last week that we were going to have the poll for voting on our next game that we're going to play up. And indeed, by the time you're listening to this episode, on Wednesday, April the 12th. That poll will be live. And as we said before, we're going to be voting again on top-down options, back-to-back top-down seasons. Your options are going to be The Legend of Zelda, The Minish Cap, The Legend of Zelda, Phantom Hourglass, or an Oracle of Seasons, Oracle of Ages double season. Those are the things you got to pick from. So go in there, cast your vote, and we will see what we're going to do next. Of course, just a reminder that season will kick off after 4 weeks of Tears of the Kingdom coverage. But with all that being said, let's get into the Sacred Realms Rundown, which is, of course, a 6-part analysis of what we played this week and the feelings that it made us feel. Today, we are covering A Link Between Worlds Chapter 8. Part 1 of the Sacred Realms Rundown is, as always, the plot recap. Matt, take it away.
As we land back in Lorule from the Chamber of the Sages, we set off to collect the sand rod from Ravio so that we can explore the next location marked on our map by Hilda. Returning to Hyrule, we buy the rod from Ravio and head to the southern desert to see what we can now explore with our new power. This region of Hyrule seems to have been particularly affected by the closeness of Lorule, as there are more dimensional rifts here than anywhere else in the land. Oddly, passing into Lorule does not land us in a desert, but in a swampy marshland infested with creatures and menacing-looking plant life. As we pass between Hyrule and Lorule, we begin exploring deeper and deeper into the desert and the swamp respectively. Each location has many treasures to hold, and we find pieces of heart and many rupees to refill our wallet. Vultures and Geldmen inhabit this dangerous region in Hyrule and plague us as we traverse the sands with our sand rod. This section of the world is unique not only in its geography, but also in the fact that the temple we must explore is not in Lorule, but in Hyrule. By using the Sand Rod and the many dimensional rifts, we make it to the Desert Palace of Hyrule and enter. The Desert Palace is one of the largest dungeons we have entered yet, and its puzzles are devious and challenging. The Sand Rod is the primary tool in our arsenal for traversing the areas, and its pillars not only allow us to walk over the sand, but also to merge into them and reach even more areas that are otherwise inaccessible. We move through the central chamber and adjoining rooms somewhat slowly at first, but with increasing confidence as we get the feel for the tricks that help us along the way. Lorule and Hyrule seem to have a lot of crossover here, as some of the enemies we have fought in Lorule can be found in this dungeon. Gibdos, Skull Ropes, Beamos, Levers, and more attempt to block our progression through the challenges. However, with clever use of the Sand Rod, we can make some of these enemies work to our advantage to either shoot each other or some hard-to-reach switches that are needed to progress. Further on in the dungeon, we jump into a sand pit and are assaulted by a large moving pillar of what looks like sand-colored gelatin, but what moves with deadly speed. We see many doors blocked by immense boulders, but are unable to move them aside with our power gauntlets. We start searching for another means of dislodging these stone blockades, and eventually find the extremely powerful Titan mitts. With these, we can lift even the heaviest stone and toss it aside as if it were a pebble. With this final piece of puzzle-solving equipment, we begin moving through the dungeon with gusto. Some new enemies poke their beastie heads out to try to stop us, but even some nasty sandworms and flying tiles can't stop us from reaching our goal. As we exit the palace back into Hyrule through a sequestered entrance, we begin looking for the boss. Instead, we find another dimensional rift that takes us to a large swath of quicksand overlooking the Misery Mire. It seems that this sand may have come through the rift from Hyrule to cover this section of Lorule, and as we begin to move forward cautiously, a huge rumble and a deep roar rip through the air as we see a huge shape moving under the sand up from the swamp. Before us emerges a gigantic cactus-looking plant that moves like a snake. It opens its flowery petals, revealing 5 eyes, circles of razor-sharp teeth, and it lets loose a deafening roar. This apparently carnivorous plant begins moving around the quicksand pit at incredible speeds, occasionally popping up out of the sand to let loose a flurry of peahats to harass us. We have to use the sand rod to create walkways between the few stone pillars that are scattered around the pit, and try to maneuver close enough to this creature to slash it with our sword or shoot it with the bow. This proves a difficult but not impossible task, and we begin to chip away at the monster bit by bit. Eventually, it becomes so enraged that it starts shooting a laser beam at us whenever it emerges from the sand, and we know that we are getting close to defeating it. After countless swings of the sword, we finally prune this troublesome weed and watch it explode with deep satisfaction. The quicksand slows, and the wall that we came through pushes back to reveal the portrait of our helpful witch friend, Irene. We head directly to the portrait and enter the Chamber of Sages once more to converse with the newly freed Irene. She says how grateful she is, and also gloats in the fact that her fortune seems to have come true, since we have now saved her from an eternity as a portrait. With all this gratitude, she encourages us to head back to Lorule as quickly as possible, to free the last 2 sages, and to push our journey towards its conclusion.
Well done, as always, Matt. That takes us into part 2, which is our takes, where we talk about this section of the game and how it made us feel. So, all right. Last week we had kind of said that there was just a little bit more game to move around in between dungeons than we had in the weeks previous. And I feel like that's true again this week. The path that takes us to the Desert Palace is just a bit more expansive, even than what we had last week. And I think that that's appropriate, because the process for getting into the Desert Palace, or the Swamp Palace in A Link to the Past, was also somewhat obtuse, right? That's the one where
Oh, word.
Oh, word. That's the one where you had to get the flute and have the birdie fly you there, you know?
Oh, yeah.
So anyway, this one, we have an interesting situation going on where the boss area and the painting are in low rule, but the rest of the dungeon is in high rule. So mainly what we're having to do is to get down to the desert area from the high rule overworld, and then we're moving back and forth between high rule and low rule, trying to get access to the dungeon, moving back and forth between the desert and the swamp. And it's a really cool little arrangement of things. It's definitely a really great way to make the player spend a good amount of time in this southwestern portion of the map, right? And there's a fair amount of exploring to be done down here as well in terms of extras that you can find, Mai, pieces of heart, stuff like that.
There's a lot of really cool use of the traveling between dimensions to reach different points on the map, even outside of the dungeon. Like there's some pieces of heart that you can find. There's some giant rupees you can find that are all only accessible if you're doing the back and forth between the realms. And I thought that was really cool. And I think it's the most utilized that particular mechanic has been in the entire game so far. Of course, if you've played this section early on in the game, then you get that out of the way early. But seeing as we're coming into it in the back, quarter to a third, we're kind of getting a good amount of use out of it now, which I thought was really good from a timing perspective. We're familiar with it now, and now it's like taking it to that next level of how do you use that to solve overworld puzzles in a meaningful and thought-provoking way. And I really liked that about this section of the game in general.
Because what we've really had before this is basically you figure out where the portal is to get you into the part of low rule that you want to be, and then you just kind of mosey to the dungeon from there, right? And so this is definitely a very different situation than that. And I also enjoyed it, Matt. I thought it was a pretty good time. Max, did you kind of feel, I don't know what order you were doing all these dungeons in. I don't know if you got Desert Palace out of the way sooner rather than later, but I don't know. Did you feel like that this was a pretty good execution of different mechanics, traversal, moving back and forth between the worlds, that whole thing?
Yeah, I think this might be my favorite kind of approach to a dungeon in this game. Partially because most of the dungeons don't really have much of an approach to them. You got the sneaking to the Dark Palace, and then everything else is kind of just a straight shot, like you said. So this one was a nice kind of loop to throw us in, which was like, there's a bunch of gameplay involved. You have to do some puzzles. It's actually kind of harder to figure out in here and there, like what path you need to take or like what angle you need to shoot the sand rod off at. It's also got the interesting distinction of being the only dungeon in low rule that cannot go first. You have to do at least one other dungeon before you do this one because you need to get the sand rod. Which I don't know why they made that choice, but I think it's interesting. And I think the actual approach to get to this dungeon has a couple surprises in it. Like when you realize like kind of the structure of this, where you're actually going, do you go to the desert first and then to this dark world, or the other way around? Either way, like it finds a couple moments where it surprises you about like which world you're going to do what in, culminating in the biggest surprise, which is like, oh, this dungeon is in the light world, which we are not expecting at this point in the game.
Yeah. And I actually did think, we'll talk about the dungeon more specifically in a minute. I did think it was very funny that for some reason the enemies that are in the dungeon are low rule enemies, even though they're in high rule. But it was a fun little interesting thing. But yeah, definitely an interesting like turn of expectations there. And I really did appreciate that very much. And it's similar to you, Max. It does kind of make me wonder what the rationale was for gating one of these temples in this way. Because I can't see an immediately apparent reason other than maybe just like I don't know. They were doing something so new in terms of the linearity of dungeons that maybe they were just like, well, let's throw one thing in here that keeps it a bit more standard to what people already know. I don't know.
Yeah, like traditionally, the reason they would care about dungeon order is like the obvious one, of course, is you need the item from this other dungeon in order to play through this dungeon, but that wasn't the case here. Or the second most obvious one is like, there is a simple version of a puzzle that we're going to teach you in an early dungeon and then have a more complicated version in a later dungeon where you already know the mechanic. But I don't really think that happens either here, so I don't know why.
I mean, the only puzzle that really is comparable is, moving the sand and moving the water. So like you have to fill some rooms with sand in this dungeon, and in the I don't remember what it's called, the water, this game's water temple, you have to do the same thing with water, but like that's it really. Yeah.
Is it
right? And the dungeon you have to beat first is Thieves Town anyway.
So it's not even the same dungeon. Yeah.
Is it possible that there was kind of a categorization on Nintendo's end of things in terms of like in their minds, there was a variation in difficulty between dungeons and dungeon areas, and they might have felt like this whole section was just harder. And so, maybe it was an intentional thing where it's like, okay, we want the player to have done at least one other low rule dungeon before getting to this one.
Yeah, quite possible. I mean, they definitely had an intentional order to the dungeons where the ones that are easiest and fastest to get to are also the easiest dungeons.
Yeah.
Right. So like you kind of have to work at it in order to even get to one of the hardest dungeons first. Which it basically naturally filters players towards dungeons that they have the skills and resources to beat. Like there's another dungeon that you haven't gotten to yet that is also probably easily the hardest dungeon in this game, and it is the hardest to get to.
I guess we'll just.
So there was definitely an element of.
I guess we'll just speculate that that's probably the reason. I think it's the only thing that makes a ton of sense as we're kind of talking about it. But I mean, yeah, definitely. Even moving past the dungeon, this area of the game is just a bit more difficult, right? Like enemy density is a little bit higher. There's a lot more, types of enemies. And even moving past combat difficulty, there is some inherent difficulty just in the act of what we're doing. What we've been talking about, where the player's moving back and forth between multiple interdimensional gates and then having to combine that with sand rod traversal, right? Like, it's definitely, it's a few different things all at once. And it's one of those times where it's tough for me to accurately gauge how much we can actually call that a difficult exercise in any meaningful way, because I've played this game before and I've played lots of Zelda games before. So it's not very often that something comes along in one of these games that I would categorize as being like really like freaking hard,
You definitely have a bit of a blind spot because you can only put yourself into the head of a new player so much. Which all the game designers struggle with too, by the way. That's one of the hardest parts of game design, is accurately predicting how a player with less experience than you is going to feel.
But one of the main things that we do get access to here is the return of a Ravio item, which has been completely absent from our discussions for the last 2 weeks. And I was very, very happy that streak is now broken, because it's definitely very fun learning the ins and outs of a new item, right? And I will definitely say that the sand rod is one that I don't think back on super fondly. Like I don't hate it. I don't think it's like the hammer levels of I never use it, but it definitely is one of the items in this game that serves a very specific purpose and doesn't have a super great combat usage outside of that, because most of the items I find that I continue using throughout the game after I've already cleared the dungeon that they're attached to are ones that are good in combat, right? So the bow, the fire rod, the bombs are perpetually useful, but like I'm I'm definitely not spending too much time equipping like the tornado rod, for instance, or or even necessarily the ice rod or the hammer or any of those.
You're not using the tornado rod?
So I use the tornado rod when I go to the Tower of Treachery. Just because it's useful for stunning large groups of enemies at one time. But in like regular gameplay, so the way that I usually do this is that I've got the bombs permanently locked to the top button spot, and then the bottom one is always going to be either the upgraded bow or the upgraded fire rod, depending on how I'm feeling. I just don't usually find myself in a situation where I'm needing to stun too many people. Like it's always useful, right? But a TIE fighter. There's a TIE fighter.
That's a weird sounding one too. Whoa.
It's a Learjet.
Oh wow, we haven't had one of those.
Yeah, interesting.
So, okay, I've been meaning to ask you when I listen to these episodes, and you both say like TIE fighter, and then like a sound that is like pitch perfect, sounds like it came right out of a Star Wars movie plays. Are you editing in a TIE fighter sound, or is that actually?
Oh no, that's I wish we were actually hearing a TIE fighter. No, it's a plane. Like we're right in the middle of DFW's flight pattern for most of their inbound flights. So we constantly get like 747s and Learjets and helicopters coming over. So instead of just having the airplane noise be the background noise, it's more fun to just do a TIE fighter drop.
Just do a TIE fighter noise, right? So there you go. Mystery solved. If that wasn't clear to anybody else, that's why you've been hearing TIE fighter noises in our...
You should have lied and kept the dream alive.
I know, right?
God, I would love that so much.
Yeah, we're in the flight path for all of the Empire's twin ion engine person-to-person fighter craft.
But yeah, the gust rod, is that what it's called? Man, I'm bad with
tornado rod.
Tornado rod. I have that equipped almost 100% of the time in this game. Because to me, it's like I can just press the button. Doesn't matter where I'm facing or what I'm doing. Every enemy around me will be stunned. And then I can just slice them. Like it's just this universally useful item to me.
I can definitely see that. And
unless it's a wall master. Then it'll get you. It'll punish you.
I definitely can kind of see where you're coming from there. And like I said, the only area of this game where I feel challenged from a combat perspective now is in the highest level of the Tower of Treachery. And I definitely do rely on the tornado rod quite a lot in there, just because that's like pure like enemy mob, like high density, lots of stuff going on, just super freaking useful, and yeah, definitely recommend it for that. But the sand rod, and but it's so interesting, right? Because we're talking about how good the tornado rod is at that, and the sand rod, from a combat perspective, is the same thing, just worse, right? Like it does the same thing, but it only does it in a straight line directly in front of you.
Yeah, and it puts things out of your range.
Yeah.
Yes.
If they're on sand, so. It's not useful in combat.
So
unless it's a combat arena that is specially designed for you to need to move around high platforms over sand, which only happens in this dungeon.
And in the Rupee Rush in Low Rule.
Oh, well, yeah, there you go. That too.
So one thing that is funny that you say, Lyndon, you equip the tornado rod for the purpose of stunning enemies. That's what I use the hammer for. Like I use the hammer very, very frequently because not only does it stun enemies, but also if you happen to hit one, it will more or less squish most enemies. So squish. So I really like the hammer and I use it a lot, especially in the Tower of Terror or Treachery or whatever it's called.
Okay, fair enough. I will say though that for going back to the sand rod, for as much as the sand rod is not my favorite item in this game, I think that the puzzle solving opportunities that it kind of affords us, like the puzzles that they built around it, I actually found to be really fun. Like this is kind of like an interestingly versatile tool for changing the world around you, And the fact that it can be used to create mergeable walls in addition to just raising and lowering platforms is really cool. It's an item that's doing a lot of things at one time. So you're adding raising and lowering of platforms to, raise and lower yourself or objects, right? Or to get from one place to another. Wall merging, and then in addition to that, you've also got you've also got one extra way. Like you're basically adding an extra dimension to your possible movement, right? And that's the thing that we've been talking about a lot in this game is that varying levels of height are a big thing that we kind of keep coming back to. And it's been a few weeks since we've really had a chance to talk about that in a meaningful way, but the pillars that the sand rod creates kind of bring that back into the conversation in a big way. I think there's some really interesting stuff they do with it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, the game, the wall merging mechanic was an incredible mechanic for them to base a Zelda game like this around. Like, it has so much versatility, so many different ways it can force you to look at things in ways you're not used to, and so many ways they could play with it with mechanics like this, or like, the one enemy where the enemy has a shield and you merge onto the shield, and there's stuff like that. There's so many ways they can mess with it, and this is the one item that I can think of where you are actually changing the canvas that you can use that mechanic on by adding or removing walls. I guess bombs remove walls, but most of the time you're not really interacting with that wall merging mechanic with the other items.
Right,
This is the one item that really changes the wall merging.
And I'll tell you, when we first got the sand rod, I had no idea that it was creating mergeable walls for a while. And when I discovered that I discovered an overworld exploration trying to get to a piece of heart that was in Low Rule, I was blown away. It totally surprised me that you would be able to merge into this wall of sand. And I think that added dimensionality takes this from a meh item to a good item.
Well, and here now we arrive back at our recurring thing of, we keep forgetting that we can merge into walls, and also we're not realizing what you can merge into.
Yeah, well, but it didn't make logical sense to me that you could merge into a wall of sand. Sand is such a malleable, non-constant substrate that it didn't make any sense to me.
You're applying Breath of the Wild logic to a Link Between Worlds puzzle.
I am a little bit. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, but yeah, I think it elevates this item to another level.
I agree.
Yeah.
It is probably the most Breath of the Wild-esque item in the game.
I totally agree.
It has, that may also be the reason why they made this dungeon gated like it is. They might have just been people are having trouble remembering to even do wall merging half the time because it's so new to them. We'd better just put a buffer here so people are less likely to get here first.
I think that's fair. Yeah, that probably makes the most sense.
I can definitely see that being the case. Yeah. I think there's less barriers to the way that this item can be used within its intended space than some of the other ones, right? And that all that does is add complexity, and I can definitely see this being, especially for a newer player or somebody who hasn't played a lot of Zelda games before, I can definitely see this being an area where a lot of trial and error is kind of required in order to kind of reach your goal, Yep. Yeah. So I know we're in our takes. We all want to talk about the dungeon, and I don't want to hold us up for too long. All I really want to say is that I really enjoy TIE Fighter.
Man, it's really busy tonight.
So before we move on to the dungeon map, I do just want to say that I really like... so one of the craziest, coolest things about Zelda games that have dual worlds, especially the games where it feels like they're kind of on top of each other, like A Link to the Past and then this one, is when you have the feeling of being in a same space but inverted, Mm-hmm. It's the difference between being in Hawkins, Indiana or being in the Upside Down, right? Yeah. And not, that dynamic of things isn't always super duper interesting. There's always a difference between High Rule and Low Rule, but sometimes it's more blatant. than other times. And this time it's super fun because just the vast like juxtaposition between the desert and the swamp is fun in and of itself. And bouncing back and forth between those two very different areas that are in very same places is so interesting. And it's even cooler because I don't know if you noticed, but the swamp and the desert have their raised platforms in similar places. So it's like, it feels like a very same arrangement of things. It's just like the environment is so very different. And just from an art perspective, from an atmosphere perspective, that's always a really fun thing to do. I wouldn't say that the art style of any of this is necessarily blowing me away. And I'm realizing now that I haven't talked a lot about the aesthetic of this game since our first episode. But just to catch up on that, I continue to find it adequate, right?
I like it. Like, I wouldn't say that I love it, but I like it.
No, yeah. It's fine. Go, Max.
Oh, I was going to say, I think it's really ugly.
Really? Interesting.
I think this is one of the ugliest Zelda games ever made.
Wow.
Well, I mean...
And so I've been surprised to hearing like the like lukewarm positive reactions from everyone in the podcast season, because to me it's like this is the worst it gets other than Phantom Hourglass.
I don't think so I haven't played Phantom Hourglass, but I except for brief moments, but that's mostly a resolution thing, right? Like the DS just didn't really have the juice to do anything super memorable. Is that pretty much true?
Well, it didn't have flat. It had the characters that were designed for the Wind Waker's cell shading, but it didn't have cell shading. It didn't have flat color shading. It had kind of gross, slow resolution, like gradient texturing and lighting. So yeah, they're the bottom of the pile, but this is the second.
Well, we'll talk about that when we get to it. But I think people who are big fans of the Mario series often talk about the new Super Mario series of games in a similar way, right? Like that whole series of side-scrolling Mario games that came out for like the Wii U, and it's like it's totally fine. It's a perfectly fine interpretation of these characters, and it's totally serviceable. But it's just not. It doesn't stand out in any particular way, and it's certainly not. It does not have the easy feeling confidence of a lot of Zelda game art styles, Yeah.
It's kind of like the Funko Pop Zelda art.
Don't talk to me about Funko Pop.
I think that's a very good comparison to a real world.
Let me just say, Funko Pop.
No, he's on his soapbox.
Funko Pop killed Mondo.
He's on his soapbox,
and I will never forgive them for that.
Okay, all right.
Funko Pop was someone saying, what if we took a bunch of characters and removed their silhouettes and removed their eyes as distinguishing features? People will love it.
What could go wrong?
Except for Max.
Funny you bring up new Super Mario Brothers, because they revealed in an interview that they thought about naming A Link Between Worlds new Legend of Zelda.
Well, because this would all have been happening at the same time, right? This 3DS Wii U era, it was all a thing together.
It's the same time. Yep.
That's very interesting.
So glad.
Oh yeah. I mean, very well, because I think with Mario, you can sort of like, there's sort of a loosey-goosey kind of convention to the naming and branding of those games that works for it, because Mario can sort of be really anything that they want it to be as they're making it, and people will mostly be cool with whatever that is. Zelda, there's a bit more of a particular set of requirements for Zelda success, I think, than there are for Mario success. At least that's my take on it. But I think the art style, it falls into a very similar category, which is just that, like, yeah, you know what? It works perfectly fine, but it is a little disappointing for a series that has such a history of uber distinctive artistic expression. And that's where I'm at with that.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
There is Lyndon's takes on Sacred Realm Rundown.
Lyndon's takes on art.
Congratulations. You implemented your own section 3.5.
There you go. Well, I mean, I feel somewhat qualified to speak to this point. But
I feel like you're the only really super qualified person to do that. Yeah, there you go.
Okay, thank you.
Congratulations.
But regardless,
and there's your one compliment for the evening.
I appreciate you, Matt. I will take it and cherish it. So anyway, that bouncing back and forth between the two very different worlds, super fun time. Does anybody else have anything they want to say about just this general area, the things we do here before we bounce on into the actual desert palace?
I love the surprise of thinking that you're going to a big swamp. Especially, it's like a bait and switch if you've played A Link to the Past. You're like, oh, it's in the swamp. This is where Misery Mire is. I'm going to go play Misery Mire. I've done that before. And then you get there and like they're like, nope, sand.
Desert instead.
Also worth pointing out, where else have we seen swapping between desert and very wet alternate world? Skyward Sword. Works every
time.
Woo! There you go. You immediately just got on Matt's good side, so well done. But also, just completely objectively speaking, I think that the Lanayru region of Skyward Sword is fantastic. So there you go. In total agreement. Anyway, cool. Well, with all that being said, let's get into part 3, which is the dungeon map, where we talk about this week's dungeon from mechanics to music and more. This week's dungeon is the Desert Palace, which inexplicably, so I get how the Desert Palace exists as it does in Hyrule, because it's in the same spot and looks mostly the same from the outside as the one in A Link to the Past, right? Why is a chunk of the desert in Lorule? Did it break the dimensional plane and just did a section of this dungeon just scoot into Lorule? Or I'm kind of a little unclear on the mechanics of how this works, because
it's a very isolated desert.
Yes.
It's, and again, next to a swamp. So the geography of that makes literally no sense.
And even Hilda's just I repeat, there is no desert in Lorule. And I'm sitting here well, you've got a 10 by 20 rectangle of desert in Lorule.
You
Hilda.
have maybe 3 acres worth of desert.
Yeah.
It's right there. Where'd that come from?
This is a sandbox.
Yeah, I was going to say, you come to find out that this is the Lorulian royal family's sandbox.
Well, it's full of something a lot more ferocious than womp rats, so maybe we should take care of that for them, huh?
No kidding. So all of that aside, little weird fictional thing going on there, and I still don't totally get it.
It would explain why there's Lorulian monsters in a Hyrule dungeon.
Because we broke
the dimensional barrier.
Yep.
Yeah, they're collapsing together.
Man, well, there you go. Cool. Confirmed. Put that under headcanon, Matt. Let the record note.
Ding.
So
I don't know. We
noted.
need a sound for that.
For headcanon?
Yeah, we do it a lot, so we should probably have a sound for that at some point.
I'll think about it.
Yeah.
But anyway,
we'll
talking about the actual substance of this dungeon, what we really have here is a dungeon that has kind of shaken me out of the Lorule dungeon doldrums that I've been sinking into over the last few weeks. And I'll expound more on that here in just a minute. But Max, you chose this dungeon specifically. This was the first one that you picked. You seemed very excited about it. And I would just like to ask you, as Matt pops open the whiskey. There you go.
Ooh, that was a good one.
That's the good noise. I would like to ask you where you were at with this dungeon, your thoughts and feelings on it. Feel free to just go forth and freewheel.
So, quick story time is when I replayed this game, I didn't remember the dungeons very well. So part of the reason I played the whole game ahead of the pod, was so that I could scout it out and figure out which dungeons I wanted to do. My first choice was Dark Palace, because that dungeon is
that dungeon rocks. Amazing. It's so good.
Joshua beat me to it. But basically what happened was every time I played a new dungeon in Lorule, I was like, no, this is better than the last. This is better than the last. And then so I played let's see, what order did I do it in? I did Skullwoods first, and then Thieves Hideout, and then Turtle Rock, and then Desert Palace. So I got to Desert Palace. I'm like, okay, no, this is definitely going up.
So let me interrupt you for 1 second just to say that's so interesting to me, because I think you're the first person that we've talked to who did Skullwoods and Thieves Den first. And kind of the thing that we have been saying over, especially those 2 episodes, was that we wonder how the game would feel if somebody did those first, just because they both felt, one, a little simpler, just by virtue of not requiring a Ravio item, but also just because of their proximity to like where you get shooped out into low rule for the very first time.
Yeah, it's funny because I tried to do the dungeon that is in where like Hylia is in the light world first. That was, you remember earlier where I was like, oh yeah, I got to like the entrance of one, then I decided to come back to it later. That was that dungeon. So I was kind of just exploring around the dark world, and I don't even remember what my thought process was, but I kind of stumbled across Skull Woods first. Of all things somehow.
Yeah.
But it worked really well. Like it felt like I didn't feel a big difficulty jump compared to previous dungeons. And I think that if I had started with like some of these other dungeons, I would have felt a more severe difficulty jump.
Yeah.
So I do think I may have stumbled across kind of a intentionally natural feeling first dungeon pair.
Yeah, I
think you've pretty much,
if such a thing does exist in this game, then I think you did it.
I'm so predictable.
But going back to the Desert Palace.
So anyways, I love Desert Palace because I love the Sand Rod. Like just the kind of puzzles it allows them to create are really great. There's some really good highlights in there. Make you think in interesting ways. And I love the aesthetic and kind of the sense of place in this dungeon. It's kind of got that Spirit Temple / Arbiter's Grounds vibes that I really appreciate in a Zelda dungeon. Like the music in this dungeon is really good. Kind of spooky, and I love it. I want dungeons to have music that makes me like, that sounds ominous and makes me like feel tension. And this dungeon achieved that.
Well, and that was another big Dark Palace win, right? Like that dungeon has incredible music, and I feel like the soundtrack in this one works for very similar reasons. And I feel like anytime I hear a soundtrack for a desert dungeon in a Zelda game, and it really leverages deserty feeling themes well, it always stands out to me because, you know, we always get, like, we get our fire dungeons and our water dungeons, and like we have some often recurring types of dungeons in Zelda games, but I feel like desert ones are kind of like, they're out there, they do exist, but they're fewer and further between. And when we go to those, they always feel somewhat like more exotic to me than some other types of dungeons that we get.
They have a very strong aesthetic that is very different from all the other Zelda dungeons. I think is a big part of that. Funny thing, like when I was replaying this, I got through the first few light world dungeons, and I was like, wow, I thought I remembered this game having amazing dungeons. These dungeons are kind of not blowing me away. And I was like, oh, and it's so disappointing that they all have the same music. That's one thing they should have kept from newer Zelda games. And then I got to the dark world, and I was like, oh, they were purposefully leaving that to make a bigger contrast. These are the good dungeons.
Yeah, once the training wheels are off, they're off. So,
yep. And they like every dungeon has like this really good like remix or reimagining of the LTP Dark World dungeon theme. They're all pretty different.
Yeah.
Which I appreciate.
Yeah. Matt, how about you? What, like, first impressions on this dungeon? What were you feeling?
Yeah, I was so intrigued by the fact that we were starting the dungeon in the light world just straight up. I was going to text you about it today, but then I was like, no, I'm going to save it for the pod because we're recording tonight. And the fact that the entrance to the dungeon has the twin roba or the twin mold, it's the three eyes with the pincers. I was like, ooh, I like that. So it like, just right out of the gate, it was kind of hitting some really good buttons for me personally. And you're right. I think desert palaces, sand palaces generally have a really awesome aesthetic. It's one of the reasons that the Spirit Temple is my favorite temple in Ocarina of Time.
Yeah.
And it like And same with Stone Tower Temples, my favorite temple in Majora's Mask.
Well, and like Max was just mentioning, the frickin' Arbiter's grounds in Twilight Princess.
I know. They're always good. And Skyward Sword's Sand Temple, the Lanayru
the
sand mines. No, the sand mines and the sand ship also.
Good.
Yeah, all of them are good. Like there's not a single one that I can think of that is not a great dungeon. So very excited going into this. And the puzzles I think are really, really good. And the use of the sand rod was excellent. There are a lot of times where you have to, get yourself on a raised platform to hit multiple switches or raise a BMOS to hit switches on your behalf. Yep. And you have time all these things the right way. I think this may be my favorite dungeon, honestly. Like I think Dark Palace might still come above it, but it's very close. Like I think that this does such a good job of knowing what it's setting out to do from a puzzle perspective, the item usage perspective. The enemies are challenging and there are more of them than in some of the other dungeons that we've had. Mm-hmm. I think it really finds a really good collaboration of all of these things to make an excellent dungeon. And I had a little bit of a unique experience with this dungeon because I decided to do something that I have never done before while playing Zelda. And that is I got the Titan Mitt and I left the dungeon. And I went and did more exploring with the Titan Mitt in the middle of the dungeon. And I did that very much on purpose, again, because I've never done it before. So I wanted to see how that might change my experience with this dungeon in general. And of course, it made the dungeon feel longer because I basically had an interlude, right? So I went and I did a bunch of other things and I upgraded my Master Sword the rest of the way. I went and got the last Master Ore and came back into this dungeon with the Golden Master Sword.
Yeah, you're Gold Sword now.
Yep, I am Gold Master Sword Edition. And upgraded my Fire Rod also. So I did both of those things in the middle of this dungeon. So it was, and I think that was really... I think that elevated it even more, just a little bit, just giving me something to accomplish mid-dungeon, right? Because one of the things we've been saying a lot is that you get, even if there is a dungeon item, it doesn't feel like that is the midpoint of the dungeon. And there's not like from here forward, the dungeon feels different than it did from the beginning.
Right.
And it kind of gave me that separation point mentally to where I went back and explored and then came back and felt like I had a second half of the dungeon to do. That was very beneficial for me personally. And I really
gave you the classic Zelda dungeon feeling.
It did. Yeah. Progression and stages. Right. So I liked that a lot. Man, yeah, I just really, really liked this dungeon a lot.
So a lot to get into there. One, I just want to say, so what you're talking about where you left the dungeon to go do some other stuff, for whatever reason, I rarely do that. When I get into a dungeon in a Zelda game, I block off 30, 45 minutes and I just do it front to back. And it feels weird to me to leave the dungeon before.
It felt very odd. I was uncomfortable.
Yeah. And there's no reason that it should, right? Like you should be perfectly free to do that. And clearly it's actually like a boon in some ways, but I never ever do that. So kudos to you for taking that leap, Matt. Not that it's it's pretty low investment, but
it's changing up my own formula, right?
Yeah. And it really gives me hope. Like when I think about what I want dungeons to be in a Breath of the Wild style game, that's kind of what I think about, right? Where you can just kind of freely enter and exit it within the overall world, right?
Yep.
So there you go. You're ahead of this hypothetical curve that may not even be the lines along which Nintendo is thinking, but I hope they are. But so very cool on that. I do want to say that I completely agree with you. A lot of the puzzles that were happening in this dungeon, I thought were really fun. I was saying last week that even though we have a boomerang in this game, I wish that it was used more for puzzle solving. And the example that I used was multiple switch hitting the way that it was in Wind Waker and other games, right?
Yep.
And I like that a version of that appeared here, both with the sword spin to hit the multiple orbs puzzle and then the BMOS laser to hit the multiple orbs puzzle.
Yeah.
Something about this sort of puzzle in a Zelda game is really fun for me when it just gives you it gives you a bunch of switches that you have to hit in a small area and you just have to figure out how to do it. I'm not sure why that is, because the solution is fairly apparent as soon as you get in there, right? It's not like this is hard to figure out, but something about it gives me that good brain chemical in a way that I can't quite describe, and I enjoyed seeing it for sure. I similarly really liked this dungeon. The music was a really good mood setter right from the get-go. Really enjoyed it for that reason. But, the biggest thing for me, and Max, I don't know, I think you've been listening week to week, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So, one of our biggest gripes that we've had with dungeons, especially post Dark Palace, is that while at the beginning we appreciated the brevity and the focused quality that these dungeons had, at some point they just started to feel too short. It started to feel too much like we were getting 2/3 of what we really expected from a top-down dungeon in the back half of its gameplay time.
Yeah.
And the great thing that this dungeon did was that it totally bucked that trend for me. There was a moment where I had been playing for about a half hour. I don't know. I'd gotten through quite a few puzzles. I'd gotten my first small key, and I was really having a good time. And I went and I checked the map and was like, okay, I'm probably pretty close to the boss key and the Titan Mitt and the boss and all those other things. And then when I went and checked the map, I realized that there were 2 entire floors of unexplored rooms aside from where I'd been. And I was just like, oh my God, shoot it straight into my veins. Holy crap. I was expecting to be just almost done with this thing. And then and then I went and looked at the map and I was just like, oh dude, you've got 2/3 of this dungeon left to go. And that was such a refreshing and good feeling. I can't tell you how good that made me feel.
It feels more like a Link to the Past dungeon than most of them.
It really does.
Yeah. Which is funny because the Link to the Past version of this dungeon is actually not really even such of a much. As I remember,
it was fine.
As I remember it, this Desert Palace in A Link to the Past was one of those dungeons where it was a lot of unnecessary, misleading rooms, and the actual path through the dungeon was pretty short.
Yeah, it's not huge. Misery Mire was huge, but also had a lot of stuff that was optional. Yeah. So there's a couple of notes about that trend where the dungeons are shorter in this game. There is generally a lot of pressure in modern games to make content types of a given category, like dungeon would be a category in this case, have a similar length. And there's a bunch of reasons for that, but relating to balance and pacing and whatnot. But a lot of it has to do with they want players to have an understanding of what to expect in terms of time investment before they get started on a thing that they might want to do in a single.
Well, it's like strikes in Destiny 2. They're typically a 15-minute affair.
Yeah, in Destiny, especially since it's multiplayer, and we really care a lot about that. So anyways, that kind of creates this pressure for them to pick a standardized size for all their dungeons and make them roughly fit the same length of play. I don't know how much Nintendo actually pays attention to that as a goal, so that's just kind of speculation on my part, but it would help explain why they're not doing the Link to the Past thing where the early dungeons are short and the later dungeons are huge. They're kind of all more constrained towards the same band.
So there is an interesting piece of evidence that I can kind of contribute to what you're talking about, Max, at least in terms of how can we determine what Nintendo considers to be a large amount of time spent in this game? And that is how often do the weather vanes that you say that start chirping and telling you that you've been playing for too long.
Which seems pretty quick.
Right, yeah. I mean, I feel like it's about 45 minutes, but it really feels like a half hour. But I feel like that's pretty telling. But I feel like that's pretty telling. I mean, maybe it's not the totality of like, oh, Nintendo considers this to be a long amount of time spent in Link Between Worlds or whatever. But it's definitely some evidence in favor of like, yes, they are considering 30 to 45 minutes to be a pretty good amount of time spent in this game. And if you go much bigger than a lot of these dungeons have been, then you're definitely exceeding that amount of time for most people.
Yeah. I did not consider that at all, but that actually might be a huge reason why. Like if they had some like from the top like goal set to like, we need to try to have our play sessions underneath this time because that's what we've determined is a healthy time for the kids that play our games, which Nintendo cared about a lot because they cared about being trusted by parents. Then that could be the reason why dungeons are shorter and there are more dungeons. Which reminds me of the other thing I was going to throw out there, which is that during production at one point, one of the lead designers on this game had suggested, pitched to Shigeru Miyamoto that he wanted to make 50 dungeons.
Whoa!
For this game.
I mean, I would play all 50 of those dungeons. Bring it on.
And they would have been, smaller dungeons, probably. Somewhere between the actual dungeons and the like treasure hunt caves you find in this game.
Almost like shrines, you might say.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But yeah, I thought that was interesting. There's actually a lot of information about the development of this game that has some interesting ups and downs that I'll get into next episode.
Cool. Well, for now, let's just say that, I mean, so Matt, are you similar to me where you were really starting to feel burned out by the length and the vibe of the dungeons that we were getting?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, me too. I mean, it was really starting to be like at first it was one of those things where I was like, this is fine. Not every dungeon has to be a marathon. Some of them can be sprints. And as long as it's fun, then it's okay. And they were fun, like with the exception of Skull Woods, which we had our problems with. Swamp Palace and Thieves Den, they were sprints, but there was fun stuff there, right?
Totally agree. Yes.
But even with that being said, at some point it was just like I need more. I want more from this. And
yes.
And Desert Palace really, really gave me that. And the thing that's nice about that is that it's not even just about the number of rooms that are in this dungeon. It's about the fact that puzzle solving with the sand rod requires at times a certain amount of trial and error that also extends the amount of time that you're spending interacting with it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think that this dungeon finally felt like a full-length top-down dungeon that I could sink my teeth into.
Yeah. And the interesting thing is, and Max, I know you've beaten the game, so maybe tell me if I'm wrong, but my recollection is that definitely one, but maybe both of the dungeons that we have coming up after this one are also both just a little bit longer than stuff we've done earlier in the game, and I'm excited about that. And I really hope that my memory is not failing me here. But
one of them is definitely the hardest, and probably, if it gives you any trouble, longest dungeon.
God, I love that.
That's exciting.
That makes me so excited to hear. But no, so the thing that's fun about this too is that I feel like we actually have a very good balance of puzzle solving versus enemy density. I mean, there's a lot of dudes running around in here. And I will say that in a top-down Zelda game specifically, levers are one of the most frantic enemies that you can fight.
Totally agree.
Because even though they're pushovers, right? Like they're a one-hit KO, definitely if you have an upgraded Master Sword. The fact that you can't see them in advance and they just pop out of the sand, usually 3 at a time.
Yep.
that always adds a little bit of extra difficulty and a little bit of frantic quality to enemy encounters. And I do appreciate that.
Yeah. And then there was that room with the cactus dude from Mario, or he was kind of like the cactus dude from Mario.
He looked more pumpkin-y, which I thought was funny.
Yeah. But as soon as you hit his little body segments off, they just fly around the room at light speed. And you're just like, whoa, hold on. Hey there, bud.
I thought of when I saw this guy.
What'd you think of?
You might actually this might be previous to like your earliest memories, but there was a Power Rangers villain one time who
I remember the pumpkin
rapper.
I remember the pumpkin rapper, Lyndon. I watched all of the Power Rangers with you when I was young, and then I also kind of introduced Jackson to them a little bit when I was a little bit older, just because I was like, I watched this with Lyndon growing up. This will be a fun thing for me and Jackson. But at that time I was like almost 10, and it was no longer that interesting anymore.
If you, the listener, want some context, go YouTube a link for the pumpkin rapper in Power Rangers.
From the OG Power Rangers.
And be prepared for
nightmares.
Be prepared for the worst rapping that you've ever heard in your life, behind even Will Smith. So there you go. Okay, yeah, that was a bit of an aside. But no, totally agree. Lots of fun combat encounters in this dungeon. And I really do feel like it also had a very nice flow to it, right? Like, it did feel split up into sections the way that some of them haven't necessarily. And even though that didn't have anything to do with items, right? It's like you don't get an item and that opens things up. What this dungeon does do, it withholds keys from you until you get past the first third of the dungeon. Like, the first third of the dungeon is very much just exploration and learning how to puzzle solve with the sand rod. And then
learn how to sand rod,
yes.
Then go find keys.
And then once you get the Titan mitt, then you start getting keys and you can kind of get into the back half of the dungeon. And that was really nice because it gave us exactly what we've been missing, which is a feeling that that like one section of the dungeon is giving way to another more complicated section.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's a good progression and very positive feelings. So while Lyndon is coughing to his death, I'll move us along and say, Max, do you have any other final thoughts you want to put on this dungeon before we move on to the boss?
Yes, I have a bunch of notes.
Yes. I love it when guests bring notes.
Well, and I feel like Max typically shows up with a wall of notes, and I appreciate that because all that is pod in our pocket. Like, let's go.
And Lyndon and I famously have no notes. We just freewheel. We're not.
I've heard you talk about notes before.
I occasionally take notes.
I generally, I'll start, if it's a game I've never played before, I'll start the game taking notes about general thoughts and things. But I usually fall off of that by about the third dungeon because I feel like I've gotten enough of a feel for the game that I can freewheel more successfully.
I have to take notes because my brain is like Swiss cheese. And it's too many Zelda facts crowding out everything else. So there's no room for new Zelda facts. So let's see. My notes, cool music. In quotation marks, LTT BMOs. No. Those things are really painful.
Yeah. Especially because you can't kill them in this game.
In either game, yeah. And they're very fast. Like, that laser really rotates very quickly.
Yeah, it goes quickly.
I have another note that it says, it's cool that you can dodge them with wall mechanic. They can't hit you when you're in the wall.
And also when you raise the sand rod so that they can't shoot you or see you.
Which is important for some puzzles. One-way switches, not a puzzle. That's an unfinished note. But so we've talked about the difference between puzzle box and non-puzzle box dungeons in this podcast before. But one of the key features that requires a puzzle to qualify for the puzzle box label, in my mind, is that when you change the state of the dungeon, it can't be a one-way switch. It's for the same reason that, if every time you made a move, it would click into place because you knew it was the right move on a Rubik's Cube or something, and that wouldn't be much of a puzzle, right? You need to have to figure it all out at once. So that's why this dungeon, a lot of it doesn't qualify for that label in my mind. Because a lot of the switches that change the state of things, like flooding sand into a room, are one-way latching.
So here's a rabbit trail for you, Max. What is your all-time favorite puzzle box Zelda dungeon, and why is it the Water Temple from Ocarina of Time?
The Water Temple is up there. It might be Stone Tower Temple, though.
Oh my God, yes.
That is probably in my top 5 favorite Zelda dungeons.
It might be in my top 3. That dungeon's really good.
It is amazing.
I'm excited to replay a certain water dungeon in Oracle of Ages when the podcast gets there, because that.
Well, you might get it next season. That's possible.
Brutal. Okay, let's see what else do I got. Tiles flying off the floor to attack. Boring when drawn out. That happens a couple times in this dungeon. You just have to sit there.
I literally I sat at the door with my shield raised and didn't move for a solid 30 seconds.
Well, and to me, this puzzle would have been a lot. I call it a puzzle. This encounter would have been a lot more fun if there was actually so if you had to jump down from the door into a lower area and you had to raise that sand block in the middle of it to defend yourself from the tiles. That to me would have been a lot more fun, because the best answer to do this is to do what Matt's saying, where you walk in the room and you just pop your shield and then nothing can hit you.
Yep. Hook shot can't connect to chest. Bah.
I hate that in this game.
It annoys me. I haven't even tried.
No, it acts like it hits stone. It doesn't work.
Yep. It's the worst. I have a note that says, if this was Breath of the Wild, you'd be able to hit other enemies with BMOS beams.
You can. You absolutely can.
Yes, that does work. Yes.
Yeah.
I'm not giving.
I had a BMOS kill a lever in here.
Yep. Functional.
I have a note that says fairies are too powerful and reduces the value of hearts. That's an interesting one. Because if you think about it, fairies refill 7 hearts in this game? Or is it 5?
I believe it's 5. It's not 7.
Yeah. So honestly, they're not even that powerful as far as the rest of the series goes. But
they're not powerful until you have 4 bottles filled with them.
Yeah. There's a thing where if you play like I do, you'd never use a fairy. You always wait until you die and let it res you, because you're trying to get away without using them. So what ends up happening is my first 5 hearts are really valuable because they're all essentially worth 4 hearts each, because I have 4 fairies. And every heart after that 5 heart mark is worth less because it's not multiplied by the fairies. I quickly reach a point in this game where I don't care about hearts. And then my last note was my favorite puzzle room was the room with arrow traps periodically shooting the switches.
Yeah, that was a really good one.
Yeah. Well, and so the timing quality that whole room has, there's actually, I think that happens in 2 rooms, right? It happens in the boss key room, and then also in that last one where you have to release the sand into the boss chamber.
I don't know. I think it only happens in the one.
I know there's 2. So the room where you have to create sand pillars for the boulders to roll across.
Yes.
At the very end of that, there's an arrow hitting a switch puzzle. It's not nearly as crucial to the room, you don't spend as much time with it as you do in the boss key room. But it is there. But I agree. That's a lot of fun, because especially when you stick 2 of the raising and lowering platforms next to each other, it creates an element of having to manage the timing of all of that. And I think that's really great. I mean, it's one of those puzzles that I've had a few of in this game where I get done with it and I think, oh, that was really fun. That could have been leveraged in a more complicated and frustrating way later in the dungeon, and I would have thought it was great, but it wasn't.
I thought it was great.
Oh, I absolutely thought it was great. I just could have used more of it.
There were enough puzzle mechanic ideas in this dungeon to fill 2 dungeons. There's a bunch of mechanics that they could have doubled down on and done harder and harder versions of kind of a similar puzzle. And they instead went kind of broad because they had too many ideas, I think, is what happened, because the sand rod is awesome.
Well, so I agree with you. I do. I think the net result of that is still very positive, at least in my opinion.
Yes. I totally agree.
Have we reached the end of your notes?
Desert dungeons.
Yeah, right.
Yes, that was the end of my notes. The only other thing I want to throw out there, because this came up in some previous episodes, is that more than any other Zelda game, I value rupees in this game.
Yes.
Like far more. I don't know what's wrong with Mike that he doesn't care about rupees in this game, but I want the rupees in this game until I upgrade all the items. Or buy all the items rather.
Yeah. And I was going to say something about that as well, which is a follow-up, as you're saying from the last episode Mike was on. I definitely feel like I'm most always at a deficit of the rupees that I want in this game. And maybe I'm just doing it wrong. Maybe Mike has like a farming technique that that I'm not privy to. But I'm definitely not flush with cash to the extent that I feel like I could at any point go and buy everything from Ravio and just be done with it.
I think right after I beat this dungeon, so by the time I got to this dungeon, I had all the items purchased. And right after I beat this dungeon, I finished upgrading all of my items. I spent the last like 2 dungeons of the game with like every single thing done except for the dungeon.
I still have quite a lot that I need to buy. A lot of that is just because for the 2 episodes that we did not need a Ravio item, I was not buying new items that week. And I didn't even like set out saying that that's how I was going to do it. I just didn't get around to it. So yeah, I mean, I still need the boomerang, the ice rod, tornado rod, hammer. I think that's all the ones I haven't purchased yet.
There's so much stuff I want to talk about. I'm glad I'm having another week. I love the Maya-Mais. I guess I'll leave my notes for that until next week.
Well, you can definitely give us a rough Maya-Mai count at this point in the game on Bloopy trails, which I will be doing as well. But I think that we've kind of covered a lot of the ground that we want to about the dungeon proper. It's a great experience, lots of really great puzzle solving, and really, I mean, length plus good puzzles equals a great dungeon almost every time. And I feel like that's what we got here.
Yeah, I agree.
Cool. Well, let's go ahead and talk about the boss. We come through the dimensional portal and we arrive in the Lorulian royal family's sandbox in the middle of the swamp. And what we are faced with is the monster from Little Shop of Horrors on steroids.
Yeah, absolutely. Zaganaga. That is its name. There we go. There it is.
That one took a lot of imagination. Z-A-G-A-N-A-G. I'm so happy for you,
like
Matt.
the banana song?
No, I got it.
Okay,
I got
cool,
it.
Cool. I'm glad
we all got it.
There.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
I don't know why, but that's great. Thank you.
Stuck in my head.
Oh man, this shit's Zanaga. Wow. Okay, that was fun. So here's the thing about this boss. I think it's a really fun time. Previous playthroughs, I have gotten to this dungeon earlier than I did this time, and because of that, I had less hearts, didn't have the blue mail, and. Yeah, and also I'm sure didn't have my Master Sword upgrade to any serious extent. And
man, this boss would be hella hard.
That's the thing. If you don't have as much survivability and you have less attack power, then yeah, this boss is actually kind of hard. It takes a ton of damage. It does a ton of damage to you, and you're constrained in your ability to do damage to it just based on the fact that the only way to get to it is by making sand walkways between lots of different platforms.
And you can't make a sand walkway while standing on your current sand walkway.
Right.
Yeah, which I made that mistake at least twice and fell into the quicksand.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that happens.
Yeah. No, it's really interesting because I think before now we've drawn a direct line with the low rule bosses between arena size and the difficulty of the boss, you know?
Yep.
Like with Gemasaur King and whatever the laser shooting jellyfish was in Swamp Palace.
Yeah. I don't remember.
Yeah, neither do I. We keep talking about how these arenas feel claustrophobic and that adds like a frantic quality to these boss fights. And this is kind of the opposite of that. Like this arena is like pretty big, but it doesn't.
It might be the only boss arena that has scrolling.
I was about to say, it's not even all contained in one screen.
Yeah.
And also, is it the only one that's outside? So far, it's the only one that's outside.
I think that it continues to be the only one that's outside.
Yeah, I think that's cool, personally.
Yeah. Definitely very frantic. I mean, the fact that like this boss is doing so many things at one time, especially in its second phase, like it's shooting out babies, it's firing lasers.
P-hats.
Yes.
Yeah, it's got like a huge hyper beam attack.
It really does, yeah. I think this boss is really fun. I honestly do. And I had a little bit less fun with it this time just because I felt a little bit invulnerable. Like I wasn't actually invulnerable, but you know, I had all these hearts, I had the blue mail, and I had lots of fairies. So at no point was I like really worried about catching a game over here. But I feel like it's maybe unfair to judge the fun quality of this boss fight just based on that.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I think that this is one of the better boss fights we've had. I think probably the best since Gemasaur King. I don't know. I really liked the
Stallblind?
Yeah, I liked Stallblind a lot. But this one was really good. I think it took in. I like when Zelda goes to more abstract monsters, right? Like it doesn't just stick with the giant spider, giant Octorok. Yeah.
Goma.
Yeah. Like when we get something new, I like that. And I think that this was a very refreshing, very new feeling boss that had very different mechanics from any boss that I personally can remember fighting, specifically just with the traversal of the arena. I guess Arbiter's Ground was kind of similar with the spinning top that you have to use to get close to things, but all in all, like I think it was a really well designed and well implemented boss fight. I can see it being very difficult, but having 9 hearts and the blue mail and the fully upgraded Master Sword, I was never at risk fighting this boss. Like even though I fell off my own platform like 3 times and I got hit a ton by the P-hats because I was just ignoring them at a certain point. Once I realized they were only doing a quarter heart of damage, I was like, screw this, I don't need to worry about them. I'm just sitting there hacking away at this giant plant. Like I think that's just a testament to where I am at in the game. But like if I had done this earlier in the game, I can see this boss being a real hassle.
Yeah. How about you, Max? How do you feel about this guy?
So this was the hardest boss in the game for me. And that's because by the time I got here, I still had just the green tunic and, you know, I didn't have a fully upgraded sword yet. I mean, it still wasn't that hard because I'm not playing on hero mode. I kind of wish I had because the game was too easy overall for me. But this was the one that I remember, like, I was actually like, oh, I'm taking damage because I'm not doing a good enough job at dodging everything. And I keep disintegrating my own sand out from underneath me by using my sand rod. And it had a lot going on. I think the boss, I kind of feel like all the dungeon bosses in this game are forgettable for some reason. And I have a hard time putting my finger on why. Because, like, Link to the Past bosses, I remember super well. That's probably just nostalgia and the fact that I played that game a million times. But when I started this game again, I didn't remember a single boss, I don't think, other than Moldorm, I guess.
Well,
kind of hard to forget Moldorm.
Memorable by repetition.
Yeah. So, like, every time I got to a boss in this game, I was surprised, but I forgot about them almost immediately afterwards. And this one was no exception. I had to go look it up again because I didn't remember it from my playthrough 2 months ago. But as far as the bosses in this game goes, I appreciate that it's kind of a more drawn out fight than a lot of them. Like a lot of the bosses, you just kind of wail on them for like 30 seconds and they're dead. This one, you kind of have no choice but to spend a little while like moving around and waiting for the boss to do stuff. And it has big spectacular attacks that you have to dodge because you can't damage it while it's doing the attacks. And it just feels like it's a little meatier than a lot of the others.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the things that I really appreciate about this boss is that in some ways it feels much more like a 3D Zelda game boss than a top-down one. And by that, I just mean that so top-down Zelda bosses typically, like we're saying, they take place in a much smaller area, and it's less about manipulating your environment to do damage to the boss than it is just like learning how to use X, Y, or Z item to trigger a damage phase, right? Like that's a pretty classic top-down Zelda boss sort of thing. And with this boss, what we really have is something that you might find in a 3D game, which is that you have to use an item to manipulate the boundaries of the arena to do damage to the boss. And I really like that. I think it's a very nice change of pace for top-down Zelda game bosses, and I'm kind of struggling to think of an analog in any other top-down that I've played to what happens here. And granted, like I'm missing a few from that list. Like there's a few top-downs that I have not played, and so it's totally possible that they're in there. But that's just my off-the-cuff observation.
Yeah, I think you're right. I can't think of any counterexamples offhand. Maybe the DS games will have some.
Yeah.
But in terms of like manipulating the environment to create the state you need to be able to damage the boss, that's not a thing that happens in 2D Zelda games very often.
So I'm definitely willing to give it pretty high points just based on that alone. Do we have anything else we want to say about this boss before we get out of part 3?
Negative. I'm good.
Cool. Max, how about you?
Nope. Nothing
Beautiful.
else.
Well, that takes us out of part 3. Truly a memorable dungeon map. Definitely a very good one. Let's go ahead and get into part 4, which is Bloopy Trails, where we talk about interesting things that diverted our attention this week. And, I feel like the further that we go in this game, this just kind of becomes the My check-in, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's fair. Yeah.
But that being said, I'll still bounce it to you first, Matt. Do you feel like you have anything worth reporting here?
I mean, I kind of said it in the dungeon map. I went and got the last piece of Master Ore, fully upgraded my Master Sword, and I got to 59 Maiamais. I actually also did another one of the rupee treasure hunts, the one where you have to use the cuckoos to float down. Yeah, I did that one.
Nice. I know we've said it before.
Yeah,
but I really like those.
And they're really great. I like them
really
a lot.
Like those.
I also donated like 1,800 rupees to the Rupee Fairy, which like I'm starting to just begrudge how many rupees you have to donate to get that bottle. But I'm going to do it. I'm this far in. I'm not stopping till I get that bottle.
What is it, 4,000?
It's 3,000.
Yeah, I mean, that's not nothing. Yeah. So I am currently at 64 Maiamais.
Nice.
And I'm kind of getting to that point now where I've discovered pretty much all of the gimmies, right? Like all of the really low-hanging fruit Maiamais, I think I already have.
Yeah.
And so I'm getting to the point now where like when I'm in an area, I'm checking the Maimai map and I'm seeing like, oh, you still have one left. I'm like, all right, let's go searching.
Yep.
And that's fun. Like I really appreciate that. It feels like there's a really good balance of like there's some just hanging off of walls, right? And then some others that you really have to go looking for. And I really do think that 100 was a good number for them to shoot for with this. It's not boring for me yet. And if nothing else, it's leading to me spending more time just poking around in the overworld, just trying things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's some that are hidden in sand, which now that you have the sand rod, you can pop them up.
Right. And so, and
And the Titan mitt.
Yes. Well, there are some under the big rocks.
Titan mitt opens up a bunch of new things in this game. But I will just say, to that point, if you're playing this game not with the volume on, then I highly recommend cranking that volume up or listening on headphones or something, because a lot of these Mai-Mais, especially the ones that are in the sand, for instance, if you can't hear that little chirping sound, then you're kind of lost at sea.
For sure.
At that point, it's just like, oh, you randomly tried some sand rod here, and hey, look at you got lucky, Definitely neat.
It definitely rings some alarm bells for me around like accessibility for hard of hearing players.
Yep.
Like we would consider that a serious problem on most games that I've worked on.
I think that this is another example of like Nintendo occasionally shows flashes of like accessibility brilliance, and they seem to do so completely by accident. Right?
Yeah.
And this is one of those instances where it feels like, that's really probably not the best way that could have been done. I mean, and again, 2013, 10 years ago at this point, I know that still feels like the modern age of gaming, and in some ways it is, but the conversation around accessibility in games, I think from a mainstream perspective, is more recent than that. Feel free to disagree with me, Max, if you feel like I'm wrong.
No, it's only really been in the last half decade that it's become widespread priority.
Yeah, that feels right to me, and that's great. I'm glad that we're at that point, and being the Nintendo fan that I am, I hope that future titles really kind of capitalize on that. I mean, again, this is a rabbit trail, but would you say that Breath of the Wild is accessible or not, Max? I mean, does it have any kind of glaring issues from that standpoint as far as you can remember?
Well, it doesn't have button remapping, so that's a huge knock against it on the accessibility front. Nothing else comes to mind as like a glaring problem to me offhand, but I'm far from an expert either.
Yeah.
We basically need to really do it well, you kind of need to individually bring in experts on each, kind of different swath of disability. And it's hard for any one person to actually see all of the issues.
Yeah. You got to get your Steve Sailors in to, give a talk to your studio. That's important.
Yeah.
But anyway, so all that, so Mai-Mais were my big thing this week. I got a few pieces of heart. I did upgrade my Master Sword with just to red level. Last week I said that I just, for whatever reason, forgot to go and do that, even though I had enough Master Ore. Yeah. But I did do it this week, and so my Master Sword's looking a bit beefier than it was previously. But yeah, not really much else beside that. I think I really do think that this game is one where a lot of the fun secrets are sort of front-loaded.
Yeah.
And as you get into the back half of the game, it really is just the Mai-Mai situation, which there's nothing necessarily wrong with. Mai-Mais are great, and it's still keeping me entertained. So it's hard to complain about. How about you, Max? Do you feel like there's anything worth mentioning in terms of like things that are distracting your attention or off the beaten path sort of stuff?
Well, around I think after I beat this dungeon, was when I really knuckled down, was like, I'm going to get all the Mai-Mais. I think between this dungeon and the next, I got all of them. Because I finally had the Titan's Mitt and the Sand Rod, which were the two things holding me back. So, leading up to this dungeon, I probably most of my time on side content was spent chasing Mai-Mais. I do love the system a lot. The way they decide to give you information, where they're like, okay, here's this big region that we've outlined on the map. There are 10 Mai-Mais in here. Go find them. It kind of hits this sweet spot where it's like enough information that I feel like I can reliably spend time and find them, but not so much that it's giving it away. Like I still have to look and pay attention. So I think that's really successful. Also the little squeaky noise they make is so annoying. So I want to find them to make them shut up. It reminds me of a smoke alarm that's running out of batteries. Right. This occasional high pitched squeak on the edge of your hearing. You're like, it's driving me crazy.
It's not quite as bad as the Mario 64 baby penguin, but it's up there. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
But yeah, joking aside, I think it's really successful, and you've already made the comparison to like Skulltulas and Koroks. It's kind of hitting the same niche in terms of giving you a reason to pay attention to and explore the world. Obviously, it gives you the most valuable benefit of any of those, by far. Like getting those item upgrades is a huge benefit in this game, and it's really fun to get them because like suddenly this item is twice as fun to use. And unlike Koroks and Skulltulas, they don't feel optional to me. I would like never play this game without collecting all of them.
Yeah, completely agree. Actually, interesting to that point, talking about how when you upgrade these items, they become twice as fun to use. That led me to a quick Google about what the actual differences are between the sand rod and the upgraded sand rod, because I didn't know, actually. I was kind of having trouble kind of pinning that down and trying to figure out what it really does once you upgrade it. And it turns out that it's not really much. The upgraded sand rod, when you create a sand pillar, it lasts for an infinite period of time, whereas the non-upgraded sand rod, they disappear after a little while. So
I mean, that makes a big difference in the Desert Palace.
Yeah, it definitely does.
You don't benefit from it much if you upgrade afterwards.
No, not at all. I feel like that is a little disappointing, bit of a missed opportunity. Also, I don't know how to solve for that, because my immediate thought was like, well, upgraded version should do like stun damage within a whole circle around you, right? But if you do that, now you're able to create sand pillars in a circle around you, and you're breaking puzzles in the Desert Palace. So I'm not really sure how that would work. But anyway, yeah, that's what your upgraded sand rod does. It's fine. It's fine. All right. Well, let's go ahead and get into part 5, which is Z targeting, where we lock on to fascinating characters or enemies that we happen to cross. And Matt, I'm going to let you go first, mostly because I have a really unique one this week.
Oh, good.
I'm pretty sure that no one's going to steal it from me. But
mine is Zangagaraga.
That one.
Yeah. It. I love unique. And I said this a lot in the boss section, but just the uniqueness of the enemy design, the uniqueness of the boss design. It's not just a stun it by hitting the eye. It's not it is like a hack and slash, but there's more to it just because of the arena movement. Like everything that goes into everything that is that boss, like it comes from Misery Mire up into the arena, into the sand, like just all of it. I think it works really well, and I love when Zelda goes out on a limb. It's one of the reasons I really liked Calamity Ganon's the mechanical Calamity Ganon in Hyrule Castle. Did that have a different name other than just Calamity Ganon, Lyndon, in Breath of the Wild?
No.
Just the spider version?
No, it's
not the Dark Beast Ganon. No, it was Dark Beast Ganon and Calamity Ganon.
It's all
right?
Calamity Ganon.
Oh, well, Calamity Ganon in Hyrule Castle. That's one of the reasons I love that character model so much. Is it's Zelda being unique, being different, taking things to another level, to a next step. To just, I love it when it does it. So there you go. That's why Zengagaga is my pick.
Zengagaga. Good, cool, good pick, Matt. Max, how about you?
Minor soapbox. I find the characters in this game generally forgettable, or like I don't care about them. I think that in their quest to replicate the feel of A Link to the Past, they had too many like filler characters, because that's how Link to the Past was, right? Most characters didn't have names, didn't have personalities, there's nothing to them. Because they didn't really introduce interesting cast of characters until Link's Awakening. But like I feel like they just went a little too far in like replicating like how the inhabitants of Hyrule felt from A Link to the Past into Link Between Worlds. So anyways, minor soapbox over. I'm going to pick Irene's grandmother. the old witch.
Cool. Maple.
And the reason I'm going to pick this one is because if you talk to the fortune teller in Low Rule, he has the Low Rulean counterpart of that witch with him. She's like his lover or something. And he calls her Mapes. And to me, that's super interesting because that sounds to me like a nickname for Maple, which implies that this is the witch Maple from the Oracles to me. And I love Maple from the Oracles.
It's all in the same timeline. So,
yep. It goes along with the whole fan theory where the old man for the Link battles is Link from LTTP. But I don't care about him. I care about Maple, who I love. So she's my pick.
Cool. Good pick. I don't actually recall. So I've only played Oracle of Ages, never played Seasons, and am definitely excited to get reacquainted with that character as we kind of go into that. And also, this will be the first time I've ever played the Oracle games knowing that it's the same Link as the one from A Link to the Past and Link's Awakening. So I feel like I'll have a little bit of extra just personal interest going into it from there. So that's fun. But yeah, good pick. Okay, so mine for this week is going to be the Geldman. And so the Geldman, Matt, these are the desert enemies, the shimmying.
Yeah. They look like Armos.
Yeah. Oh, from Star Trek?
Star Trek, yeah.
I am a skin of evil. Yeah, exactly. Sure. Yeah. And so they're the ones who pop out of the sand and just kind of shimmy at you and whatnot. And, they're funny enough looking enemies, right? Except, I don't know if you ever tried using the sand rod on one of these, Matt.
I have not.
All right. If you use the sand rod on one of these, it pops them out. It pops them up out of the sand. And then what you can see about these guys is that they've got legs and everything.
Oh, no.
And they're clad in red Speedos.
Oh, no.
And then they just kind of like run away from you. Still shimmying. The Zelda wiki describes them as wearing red thong underwear.
It's wonderful.
And here's the thing: we only ever see them from the front, so I'm not sure how much cheek is.
Oh, I'm sure it's cheeky
on the back
end. It's plenty
right?
cheeky.
But it's just so freaking ridiculous.
You get those sandy cheeks, baby.
Oh my gosh, it's just so like. I don't know why. I don't think I've ever done this before in A Link Between Worlds, but the first time I got in here and one came at me, I was like, all right, sand rod, let's see what the deal is. And I'll show you a picture here in a minute, Matt.
Oh, please do.
But yeah, it's just so freaking funny because they pop out of the sand and then they're like little red Speedo selves just kind of like shimmy off out of screen. They don't want to fight you until they can get back below the sand. And oh my gosh, hysterical. Like, really just a lot going on here. Yeah.
That is amazing. Wow. I'm going to go do that. Like immediately.
Yes, definitely. I don't know how many enemies in the history of the Zelda series can be said to be wearing identifiable undergarments.
These are identifiable undergarments.
Oh yeah. 100%.
Yes.
No getting around
wonderful.
it. So there you go. The Geldman, you are you're certainly something.
There you go. Congratulations to Geldman.
Nice Speedo. Red. It's very bold.
It's a bold choice. It stands out in a crowd.
All right, let's move into part 6, which is final thoughts, where we let Matt wrap up this section of the game in as succinct a way as he can think to do.
As we come towards the closing chapters of A Link Between Worlds, we enter one of the best examples of top-down dungeons that we've had in this game so far, rivaling even that of the Dark Palace. We get a dungeon that knows what it is and dives right into puzzle-solving mechanics using its main item, the Sand Rod, which is an overall great puzzle-solving item that elevates itself by also being able to merge in and out out of its pillars. We top all of this off with two things: the Titan Mitt, which will help us explore the rest of Hyrule and Low Rule as we go around the rest of our journey, and a fight with Zangara. Zangara is good enough. Zangara, which is a truly unique Zelda boss, which is a rare thing in these days. And overall, just a fantastic dungeon that we enjoyed thoroughly and are looking forward to exploring the rest of Low Rule and Hyrule as we continue our journey to free the last two sages.
Well done, as always, Matt. Hey, here's a picture of Geldman wearing a Speedo.
Oh my gosh, that is amazing. It looks like Johnny Bravo in a Speedo.
It looks like if you mixed Johnny Bravo, Clayface, and then Kylo Ren from that scene in Last Jedi where he's not wearing a shirt.
Yes. Oh my gosh, that's exactly what it looks like. A weirdly elongated torso.
Yeah, look at him. He's got like a six-pack and then huge pecs.
There it is. That is perfect.
It looks like that one viral fan art of Doug's
It does. It totally does. Oh, that's amazing. I mean,
wow.
Honestly, well, it's so funny because you look at the Link to the Past official artwork of Link fighting one of these things,
and he's just stabbing it in the face, and it looks like Clayface.
It looks terrifying.
Yeah, it looks like Clayface.
Yes, it looks like Link fighting Clayface with a sword. And I gotta say, this version of Geldman is sort of
not terrifying at all.
The teeth have been removed for me just a little bit.
Yeah,
I mean,
no doubt. It's no longer scary.
Okay, cool.
I imagine this guy running at you going,
good on you, Nintendo animators. I'm sure this was a blast for y'all. Wow, cool. Okay, that brings us to the end of the Sacred Realms Rundown. We will, of course, be back next week with another installment of the Sacred Realms Rundown, covering another section of this game, which we will be more than pleased to welcome Max back for. It sounds like he's been holding back a little bit in anticipation of this next episode, so we love to hear that.
Yes. Next episode, I will regale you all with the tale of Link Between Worlds development.
Man, I love that. That sounds like a real quick way to get another 2.5 to 2 hour and 45 minute episodes. So good stuff. We're all about that here. I, for one, am ready to call this thing done for the night. Especially, I always hate shortchanging a guest. I like to have a nice long off ramp on the episode, just like really wind things down. Be like, when it's somebody that we know we're not going to have on for another season or so, be like, yeah, let's take our time. Let's really do this thing. But this is part one of the Max Nichols A Link Between Worlds extravaganza. Next week is going to be part 2. For that reason, I feel like we can probably just call it here and leave you all in suspense for next week. How's that sound, Matt?
I think it sounds like a great idea. Let's do it.
How's that sound to you, Max?
Yeah, sounds
awesome.
Perfect.
Well, we always appreciate having you on, and we'll do the same thing next week. But real quick, go ahead and let everybody know where they can find Hyrule interviews, because I know that you're still doing quite a lot of work on that project.
Yeah, I've slowed down a little bit lately, but still going strong. So HyruleInterviews.com is the website I run. It's basically a big database of Zelda interviews and quotes from those Zelda interviews. The goal is to preserve as many Zelda interviews as I can for posterity, and also to surface kind of the legacy of people who made Zelda games, especially the lesser known creators. We need to hear about more than just Shigeru Miyamoto and Eiji Aonuma when we talk about Zelda. So I'm trying to find interviews with everyone, whether they were in QA or localization or production.
You mean to tell me that Shigeru Miyamoto, Koji Kondo, and Eiji Aonuma did not single-handedly make all Zelda games ever between the three of them?
Not at all. So, okay, biggest fact that people need to know, but they don't, is that Shigeru Miyamoto co-created the Zelda series and the Mario series. Takashi Tezuka was the co-director for Zelda 1 and for Super Mario Brothers. And he's the one who designed Link and designed half the overworld for that game. So, equal credit to Tezuka.
There you go. It's been stated for the record. Excellent. Well, Max, really appreciate you coming on tonight, man. We will, of course, catch up with you again next week. Got a lot more to talk about. Ice Palace is one of the dungeons in this game that sticks out most clearly in my mind, and that alone makes me very excited to go back and replay it. So I think it's going to be a great conversation. All right, everybody, now that we've come to the end of the Sacred Realms rundown, I just want to go ahead and say that this is the point in the episode in which we are going to delve heavily into spoiler territory for Tears of the Kingdom. So if that is not something that you want to be a part of, then now's the time to get out, because this trailer that Matt and I watched this morning was chock full of what could be considered heavily spoiler stuff. So really quite a lot to get into with this one. Matt, I mean, this is a big one, right?
Spoil taters galore, and you can boil them, mash them, and stick them in a stew and still have some left over.
I think you about covered it. I mean, geez. So basically what we got out of this trailer, in contrast to basically everything we've seen from this game up until now, which has been more mechanics focused, right? This was the story trailer. This was the analog to that last awesome trailer that they released for Breath of the Wild right before it dropped, where you really started seeing a glimpse of like what story is this game telling, because we really did not know that for Tears of the Kingdom at all, even after the last little mini direct they did where they explained like weapon crafting and all this other stuff. There was really just no hint of story content, but lots and lots and lots of that in this trailer.
Yeah, dude, it was a whole lot. It was, since we've already done the spoiler tag, the big reveal here being Ganondorf be back, and just immediately, not immediately. I mean, it was a little bit of the ways into the trailer, but revealing the big bad. Or at least what we can probably safely assume to be the big bad. It was kind of hinted at around, but no bones about it whatsoever. They even released some character art of him on social media. So, it is confirmed Ganondorf be back.
It is Ganondorf rehydrated. I know that was the joke online for... ever since that very first teaser that we had for this game where we saw the skeleton of what definitely looked like Ganondorf, people have been pretty sure that that's what we were going to get in here, but, we weren't sure, was this going to be a story about, trying to keep Ganondorf from being completely revived, because we'd only really ever seen him in skeleton form, and he's looking pretty darn alive in this trailer. He's looking like Ganondorf,
Yeah, seriously. He is, and he's looking like he's been to the gym more than a few times since last time we saw him. So, good for Ganondorf getting swole. Very jealous, honestly.
I thought it was hysterical. The meme that I keep seeing thrown around on Twitter is the SpongeBob meme where it's Squidward and he's saying, "Oh no, he's hot."
That is, it's perfect, to be honest.
I'm seeing her kind of
Mika Burton.
Yeah, who's looking
Mika
good.
Burton, who's one of our favorite social media presence people in just nerddom, had posted something similar. It was just like, "Oh no, I tripped and fell and Ganondorf caught me. Oh no, I can't get up. Whatever will I do?" Fainting emoji, right. Darn. So yeah, Ganondorf definitely looking like a snack out there. So good for him.
Looking like a whole snack, that's for sure. I did think it was really nice that we got some official confirmation of Ganondorf being a major part of the story here. But there was much more than just Ganondorf to really get into. Do you want to how should we do this? Do you want to take the trailer front to back, or do you just kind of want to list off some observations as they kind of come to top of mind? Because I don't think anything that happens in this trailer is happening necessarily in chronological order. Yeah. I'm just kind of watching it again. Some things that jump out to me just in the title sequence is, when Link's falling through the sky, you can see on the ground the Zonai, kind of hieroglyphs isn't exactly the right word, whatever the Mayan version of hieroglyphs is. And it looks like there are
areas of Hyrule that are like designated in some way, shape, or form through these zonai glyphs. There's a weird Sheikah tower thing that's like glowy from below. But then there's also some really cool shots of towns, which one of the coolest things like within the first minute was seeing Hylian tents put up in Old Castletown. So we can see like settlers returning to the gates outside of Hyrule Castle, which I really, really like. So it looks like we're carrying forward some continuity of, what does Hyrule look like post Calamity Ganon, at least until whatever is happening in this game blows it all up.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. There were definitely a few shots. The one you mentioned of Hyrule Castletown, there was one of Hateno Village. It definitely seems like Hyrule is in the process of kind of like rehabilitating post the events of Breath of the Wild, which was neat to see. There was kind of a sneaky shot in there that I had to pause it and try to figure out where on the map this was happening. But you actually see a shot of Link climbing above Kakariko Village, and it seems like there's a lot of sky ruins that are kind of like crashed in and around there. Notably,
see this huge circle thing.
Yeah. Notably, no shrine present where it should be over there. And I think that that's pretty much in line with some stuff that we've been observing over the last few trailers, where it seems like the Sheikah technology that we spent Breath of the Wild uncovering has disappeared or gone dormant again, or something along those lines. It's definitely no longer seems to be a part of the game, which makes a certain amount of sense. I feel like even though there's a little bit of like fictional explaining that probably has to be done in terms of like, where'd all this stuff go? It would be a little weird if it was all just like still hanging out, being that it's a new game and everything.
Yeah, I hope we get at least a line of dialogue, like from Zelda. It's like, it seems all the Sheikah technology has returned beneath the surface since it has served its purpose, or, whatever.
Your Zelda voice is truly impeccable. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you. We're famous for our spot on, what are those called?
Impressions?
Thank you. Yes, spot on impressions. We are very famous.
I don't think that's one of the things we are famous for, but cool. I'm glad that you think that.
Yeah. So hopefully we get a line of dialogue about that. And in addition to just the shrines, I don't see any divine beasts around here. Like in all of the shots that we've taken, and some have been very wide shots, it looks like, I haven't seen any. Have you? I haven't seen any of the 4.
I have not, but what we have seen is shots of the new generation of champions in action.
I know, that was awesome.
Yeah, that moment in the trailer where you can definitely see Riju and Sidon, and I think you can see Tiba out the corner of your eye, and Yunobo's in a shot as well. But yeah, it definitely seems like the new generation of champions that we spent Breath of the Wild getting acquainted with are definitely going to make a reappearance here, which makes me happy because I think it would have felt like a big missed opportunity if we had not checked back in with them, especially after the large part that they all played in Age of Calamity, right?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think it's really good using of those established characters. I'm very excited to see Sidon fighting. He was literally fighting alongside of Riju. Had this really cool scene where she was doing like a sword dance while lightning's coming all around her, like she's basically channeling a different version of Urbosa's fury. So that makes me kind of wonder if we're going to see a version of champion abilities come back, or what I kind of hope isn't what's happening is lots of partner up quests, or partner up quests would be fine, but as long as they're not escort missions, then that's fine. But,
well, it wouldn't be a Zelda game without an escort mission.
At least one.
At least one, yeah. It was so interesting because when I saw that shot of Riju for a second, she looked so similar to Urbosa that I was thinking like, oh my gosh, is there like some time travel shenanigans happening in this game? Which I still actually think might kind of be happening based on another shot later in the trailer. But that was definitely Riju. That was not Urbosa.
For sure. No, totally. I thought the same thing. I had to rewatch it a couple of times. Another shot that I've rewatched and am currently paused on the screen is at 1 minute, 17 seconds. This looks not like Ganondorf. This looks like Demise from behind.
Yeah.
Like the very long red flowing hair. And he looks kind of scaly on the arms. He looks mostly black. Like, I'm wondering if we're getting a demise reincarnation that like turns into Ganondorf kind of thing. Maybe that's how he rehydrates himself.
Yeah, I guess anything is really possible. What I was kind of taking away from that shot, because I know the one you're talking about, was it seems like maybe this is the blood moon ritual that is revitalizing Ganondorf. I think I think that's maybe just a little more likely. I personally would be a little surprised if we got a very explicit demise name drop, but anything is possible. I'm definitely not ready. Like, I'm not here to completely count that out as a possibility.
Sure. Yeah. And so going back to your time travel comment, sorry, I just smacked the mic. I'm sorry that I hit you. Anyway, going back to your time travel comment. So that is very interesting because the trailers that we've seen, even from the very first one, seem to indicate that Zelda is falling into some kind of chasm.
Yeah.
And presumably dying. But in this trailer, we also see later her with her same short haircut, so we know it's at least the same time frame, presumably after the intro, because obviously that has to take place in the intro where Zelda falls and Link's arm gets all jacked up. So that has to be the beginning of the game.
Whatever happens to the Master Sword happens, right?
Exactly. And then afterwards, we see Zelda alive and well and talking to other strange beings. Is this like spirit form Zelda, and is she dead, or is this time travel where we're bringing her back, or like what is? Yeah, there's definitely something going on there to where Zelda is in trouble, but presumably not dead.
Yeah, she appears like to be, and I mean, at this point, it's pretty clear that the Zonai as a race play a very large part in this story. And this did appear to be a Zonai, or at least somebody who is affiliated with the Zonai. And we actually get
now.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, so sorry. Keep going.
Well, I was gonna say, we get another look at another point in the trailer of a character who appears to be heavily affiliated with the Zonai. Very like lots of use of like dragon motifs and imagery, and ornamentation and jewelry that are very in line with the architecture of the ruins that are in the sky for sure, but also some of the outfits that we've seen Link wearing. So definitely a lot of connections there.
Yeah, so at 1 minute 41 seconds, this character comes up, and it's humanoid, but not human. It looks like kind of a cross between a Rito and whatever species Ahsoka Tano is. Like, he's got the head tails, and he's got a snout. Yeah, Togruta. And he's got all the Zonai markings, like the makeup, the jewelry, the Aztec-inspired hair braids. Like, he definitely is something, but he's not human. And some of the other characters that we see, like whatever Zonai princess, I'm assuming it's a princess or a some type of royalty. The female Zonai we see later in the trailer talking to Zelda, she looks very human, like just like a dark-skinned human. Mm-hmm. But this Zonai does not at all. And I'm very curious what that entails, or what that has to do with anything.
Yeah, I definitely am as well. We see quite a lot of new characters in here, in addition to a few returning ones. And in addition to new characters, we see a lot of new locations. And so I get the impression that a lot of these characters are maybe going to be quest givers, the same way that the new generation of champions were in Breath of the Wild. I think that is a pretty fair bet. But it's so tough because we still, there's a lot of things that we just still don't know. Like, what is the balance of time spent in this game, for instance, between the ground, the sky, and then apparently underground, Yeah,
there's a lot of crazy, interesting things that this all points to. One thing, and this is just far, far left field, left brain theory. I'm looking at some of the markings, coloration, and specifically makeup patterns of some of our Zonai characters. And they kind of remind me of Fierce Deity Link with the facial markings mostly. and placement of jewelry. I'm sure that's just a Easter egg, not a.
I think that's Uber,
not like a callback or anything.
Yeah.
I mean, no, I'm not saying Fierce Deity Link showing up in any way, shape, or form, but like it looks somewhat similar, and I kind of like that. Kind of the same way that the Twily and Majora's Mask have very similar motifs, but were never officially connected, right? Like I'm thinking there's going to be a lot of theory crafting about stuff like that.
Yeah, and I definitely think that's probably a good shout, and I can certainly see that happening. Well, let's talk real quick about one of the biggest parts of this video, which obviously there was no like tag that appeared over the video stream that said, "Hey, you're looking at a dungeon right now." But I feel like we got our first look at dungeons in this game.
I think you're right. Are you talking about the mine cart fight?
Yeah, definitely that
over
one.
Lava.
But there were several, right? There was the mine cart fight, which was really cool. We saw a glimpse of a structure like emerging from the sand in Gerudo Desert. And then, there are a few shots where we see Link doing some puzzle solving up in the sky area. And it's sort of tough to know. It's like, oh, is this a dungeon experience? Is this kind of like a more self-contained puzzle thing similar to how shrines were? Really tough to tell. But regardless, let's talk about the one area that, you can look at and pretty much just say, oh, that looks like a dungeon. And it looked like an underground fire cave with some ruins. And yeah, you're on a mine cart and you're fighting a Zonai drone from one mine cart to another. It's like, it's very Temple of Doom.
It is, and appropriate. We just watched that movie last week.
Yeah, I know.
No, it looks. Although looking at it now, I'm looking further in the background as they're turning the corner. It looks like it could be an outdoor area of Death Mountain, like an expanded or newly opened up area of the Goron mine place.
Yeah,
it's looking like there's some open sky back there. So. I hope that it is a dungeon. You and I both talked a lot in the season of Breath of the Wild about how much we want to see the return of dungeons. And I may be making this up, but I vaguely remember Nintendo having some stuff to say about, bringing back dungeons or at least hearing the feedback about Breath of the Wild not having true dungeons. So I may be making that up, but I vaguely remember it. So, I'm hoping that this is a dungeon because this looks like it very easily could be.
Yeah, it definitely does. And again, some of this is a little confusing because it's entirely possible that some like clever editing of clips has caused us to be slightly confused about whether one setting is the same from one shot to the next in this trailer, and that's totally fine. We don't want to know everything, but I definitely get the feeling that we are going to have more dungeon-like experiences in this game. And there were even one or two enemies that we saw that were very clearly like, oh, that's a boss, right? That really looks like a boss encounter, which was great. I'm very curious to see, I think that was always one of our big questions, right? Is like, how do you pull off a Breath of the Wild style game, with a dungeon component added into it? And it feels like we're going to get some kind of answer to that, which is really great. Tell you what else we saw is a really awesome shot of that huge Gleeok on Hyrule Bridge.
Yes, that was really cool. Two other awesome shots I want to call out in the same vein of just like cool enemies. This giant mech battle. So Link driving his stone mech up against a stone talus that has a group of bokoblins on it. That was really cool. I'm excited to create some transformers and take into battle against some stone talus. And then this shot, which I think is another dungeon preview shot, more or less, is it looks like a boss battle against some kind of giant flying ice parasite with Tiba and his son, and you're all flying around this giant. It looks like the lava parasite from Wind Waker, but if it was icy.
Yeah. I know what you're talking about. It definitely does look like Ice Goma, which is definitely really interesting. Again, that was another one of those shots from the trailer that I kind of immediately registered as being very boss encounter looking. Now, like you said, it takes place in the open area, in the open air, and not necessarily within a structure. So, who knows? We'll definitely see what we see there. There was one shot that I did see where Link was wearing what looked like ancient dragon inspired armor. And when I say ancient dragon, I'm talking like Farosh, Dinral, Naedra. And one thing we didn't talk about in the last trailer is that you do see those dragons like freely roaming the sky in Hyrule. So definitely interested to see in what capacity they return. That's definitely one of the lingering questions that I have. One of the other things we saw, Matt, so we've seen at this point a large variety of objects that you can influence. And what's the ability called again? It's the merge ability, where you can kind of assemble an object from different objects.
Oh, I don't remember.
Okay, yeah,
what it's called.
Neither do I. But in this one, Link gets a rocket, so that's cool.
Yeah, rocket ship. We're going into space, boys.
Yep. Tears of the Kingdom and Fast 10 both going to space.
Boy.
Regardless, another interesting shot there. Let's see, what else do we have? So I am curious about whose voice this is, who's speaking to Zelda in the trailer. This like a head Zonai person. I'm rewatching this last scene right now, and I definitely get the impression that there's a little bit of like a memory issue maybe happening with Zelda. She doesn't seem like she's kind of all there, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's definitely a gap somewhere, right? And I am curious to see what part that plays. Hopefully, they're not just going to redo the memory quest, right? But I think you're right. There's definitely seems to be, or maybe she's trying to process new information or reformat, a belief system in some way. Like, I don't know what that could look like, but yeah, agreed. I guess we'll just say
cool. Let's see. Anything else that you want to call out specifically? I think, we could spend all day kind of just picking apart the individual things that we saw in this trailer. But I think the big takeaway for me, just on a what is this doing for my excitement perspective, is one, the hype is real. I mean, I was very hyped after the mechanics presentation they gave a few weeks ago. Like that, that all seemed very fun and I was into it. But we said at the end of our breakdown of that whole showcase that one of the things we were still trying to figure out is like, can this game feel bespoke from Breath of the Wild? Like, can it feel like more than just an expansion to that game? Can it feel like its own thing? And I think what this trailer really did for me is it showed me that like, oh yeah, there's a lot here that is brand new to this game, and anything that is still lingering from Breath of the Wild, I feel like I'm just going to have extra emotional attachment to, just because I'm so invested in that area already. But it really does seem like there's quite a lot of space to be explored, quite a lot of brand new content.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think, well, number one, as far as hype level, it's over 9,000. Insert Dragon Ball Z meme here, and this trailer was amazing, and like I'm somewhat, I have some reservations about some of the futuristic type of stuff that we're seeing, like rockets and building giant mechs. Like, Zelda in a new direction. I think it will end up being fine. It's just one thing that hits me a little weird. But other than that, the game is so obviously massive, and it is so obviously its own thing, while having very direct callbacks to Breath of the Wild outside of just the setting. And seeing the champions, the new generation of champions again, was probably the thing that made me most excited. Maybe Ganondorf as well, just like seeing some of those things returning in a new way, and what that could mean for the game as a whole. So I think that this trailer definitely put it over the top, and like you said, squished any fear of it feeling like a DLC to Breath of the Wild.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm glad we're on the same page about that. I feel like I'm now in that perfect spot where I'm ready to not see anything else before this game comes out.
Yes. I think anything more would be a disservice to surprises, even for those of us who have not avoided spoilers and have been consuming, the official media. I think this is about as much as I want.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And it sounds like there's probably not going to be too much to avoid just from that perspective, because, Eiji Onuma did specifically say that this was going to be their final trailer before the release of the game. So I don't feel like we're going to have, maybe one or two extra like small social media ready trailers that might have a glimpse or two that we haven't seen yet. That's pretty standard. But for the most part, I don't think we're going to get anything else big before this game launches. We're 1 month away. We're less than we're 29 days away, 30 days away. So like,
yeah.
At this point, we're in full. It's coming. It's almost here. Let's just sit back and enjoy the ride.
Yeah. No, I'm very, very, very excited.
Cool. All right. Well, I'm glad that we could catch up about it real quick, Matt. Of course, if any new information does come out between now and then we will be sure to update you, our listeners. But in the meantime, if you are not if you're not concerned about, spoilers for this game, I would definitely recommend going and checking out this trailer from this morning, because it's a really, really great one, and I think builds a lot of excitement for the game. And if you are spoiler concerned, then best of luck to you as you go into the next month trying to dodge as many of these spoiler darts as you can. Like Indiana Jones trying to escape the hidden temple, they're flying out the walls, and I wish you the best of luck.
Absolutely. You might want to just stay off the internets in general, because YouTube thumbnails, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, all of it, just it's there. So good luck. May the odds be ever in your favor.
Absolutely. All right, Matt, this has been fun, but let's go ahead and get out of here, and then we can close out the episode. I'll catch you later.
Let's do it.
Bye. Alrighty. If you enjoyed today's show and you would like a little extra Sacred Realms in your life, you can head over to patreon.com/Sacred Realms Pod and become a patron. If you've got no rupees, it's not a problem. 5-star Apple Podcast reviews are a great free way to support us. More reviews means that more people see our show. That makes us very happy Hylians. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Sacred Realms Pod for updates on the podcast and for behind-the-scenes action. Sacred Realms will be back next Wednesday with our thoughts on A Link Between Worlds, Chapter 9, covering our adventure into the Ice Ruins. We'd love for you to play along with us and to share your thoughts on our social channels. A Link Between Worlds can be played on the Nintendo 2DS and 3DS family of systems. But in the meantime, may your hearts be full, may your arrows never miss. We'll catch y'all next time. Sacred Realms is an independent podcast production, which is produced, edited, and mixed by me, Lyndon Willoughby. Our music comes from Zelda and Chill by Mikkel and is graciously provided to us by Mikkel and Game Chops Records. Zelda and Chill is available to stream on Spotify or to purchase directly from GameChops.com. Finally, our thanks go to Nintendo for creating such exceptional and innovative experiences.